The emergence of the Nordic Bronze Age around 1700 BC marked a profound transformation in Northern European society, one that would reshape the cultural landscape for over a millennium. This transition did not occur in isolation, but grew from the established foundations of the late Neolithic battle-axe culture and single-grave culture, communities that had already demonstrated sophisticated organisational capabilities and long-distance connections across the region. The battle-axe culture, which had dominated much of Scandinavia and northern Germany from approximately 2800 to 2300 BC, established many of the social and territorial patterns that would prove crucial for the later bronze-working societies. These communities had developed a warrior ethos centred around the ceremonial battle-axe, a finely crafted stone weapon that served as both practical tool and symbol of masculine authority. Archaeological evidence from settlements such as those found in Jutland reveals that these people maintained extensive trade networks, importing flint from specific quarries hundreds of kilometres away and distributing amber throughout Central Europe. Their burial practices already showed signs of social differentiation, with some individuals interred alongside multiple axes, ceramic vessels, and ornamental items that suggested elevated status within their communities. The single grave culture, which overlapped chronologically with the later phases of the battle-axe culture, contributed equally important elements to the emerging Bronze Age framework. Named for their distinctive burial practice of placing individuals in single graves beneath earthen mounds, these communities demonstrated advanced understanding of metallurgy even before true bronze production began. Copper objects, including flat axes, daggers and ornamental pins, appear in graves dating to 2500 BC, indicating that metalworking knowledge had already penetrated the region through trade connections extending southward into Central Europe and eastward toward the Carpathian Basin. The geographic scope of what would become the Nordic Bronze Age encompassed a remarkably coherent cultural zone despite its considerable extent. Modern Denmark formed the heartland of this civilization, with its numerous islands and peninsular territories providing natural harbours and strategic positions for maritime trade. The fertile soils of Jutland and the Danish islands supported dense populations that could sustain the specialised craftsmen and warriors characteristic of Bronze Age society. Southern Sweden, particularly the provinces of Skåne, Halland and Bohuslän, shared cultural and economic ties with Denmark across the narrow straits that separated them. Archaeological finds from sites like Kivik in Skåne demonstrate that Swedish communities participated fully in the Bronze Age cultural complex, producing elaborate rock carvings and monumental burial sites that rivaled those found anywhere in the Nordic region. Southern Norway's coastal regions, stretching from the Oslofjord westward to Rogaland, represented the northern frontier of this Bronze Age world. The Norwegian communities faced unique challenges in adapting Bronze Age technologies and social structures to their more rugged terrain and a harsher climate. However, their control of important sea routes and access to distinctive raw materials, including high-quality whetstones and soapstone, ensured their integration into the broader Nordic Bronze Age network. Settlements along the Norwegian coast developed specialised fishing and sealing economies that complemented the agricultural focus of their southern neighbours. Northern Germany's coastal regions, particularly Schleswig-Holstein and parts of Lower Saxony, formed the southern boundary of the Nordic Bronze Age cultural sphere. These territories served as crucial intermediaries between the Scandinavian communities and the more advanced bronze-working societies of Central Europe. German archaeological sites have yielded some of the earliest bronze objects found in the Nordic region, suggesting that technological innovations often entered Scandinavia through these southern gateways before spreading northward through established trade networks. The establishment of trade networks capable of supplying the raw materials necessary for bronze production represented perhaps the most remarkable achievement of these early Bronze Age communities. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, required access to ore deposits that were entirely absent from Scandinavia. Copper sources lay hundreds of kilometres to the south in the alpine regions of Central Europe. The Carpathian Mountains and the Iberian Peninsula. Tin, even rarer and more geographically restricted, came primarily from Cornwall in southwestern Britain, Brittany in northwestern France, and parts of Bohemia and Saxony. The logistics of maintaining these supply chains across such vast distances demanded unprecedented levels of organisation and cooperation among communities throughout Europe. Archaeological evidence suggests that Nordic Bronze Age societies developed sophisticated systems of exchange that went far beyond simple barter. Standardised bronze objects, particularly the distinctive Nordic daggers and axes, appear in hoards and graves across the entire region, indicating coordinated production and distribution networks. The famous Nebra sky disk, discovered in Saxony but incorporating gold that originated in Cornwall and amber from the Baltic coast, demonstrates the complexity of these exchange systems and the high value placed on exotic materials. Amber played a particularly crucial role in these trade networks, serving as the Nordic region's primary export commodity. The shores of the Baltic Sea, especially along the Danish and German coasts, provided virtually the entire European supply of this fossilised resin. Amber's beauty and supposed magical properties made it highly sought after throughout Europe and the Mediterranean world. Nordic communities developed sophisticated techniques for working amber, creating elaborate jewellery, decorative inlays and ritual objects that commanded premium prices in distant markets. The wealth generated by amber exports provided the economic foundation necessary to import the metals required for bronze production. The transformation of these trade networks from simple exchange relationships into complex economic systems required new forms of social organisation. Archaeological evidence from the early Bronze Age reveals the emergence of distinct social classes that had not existed during the preceding Neolithic period. Burial practices provide the clearest window into these developing hierarchies. While earlier single-grave culture burials showed relatively modest differences in grave goods, early Bronze Age interments display dramatic disparities in wealth and status markers. Elite burials from this period contain unprecedented quantities of bronze objects, including weapons, tools, ornaments, and vessels that represent enormous investments of raw materials and skilled labour. The Boremeshoj burial mounds in Denmark, dating to approximately 1400 BC, contain the remains of individuals dressed in elaborate woolen garments and accompanied by bronze swords, axes, belt plates, and jewellery of extraordinary craftsmanship. The preservation of organic materials in these waterlogged burials reveals that elite individuals wore clothing made from fine textiles, decorated with bronze ornaments and buttons, creating visual displays of wealth and status that would have been immediately recognisable to their contemporaries. The emergence of warrior chieftain classes represented a fundamental shift in Nordic social organisation. These individuals combined military leadership with control over trade networks and bronze production, creating power bases that transcended traditional kinship-based authority structures. The bronze sword became the ultimate symbol of this new elite, requiring exceptional skill to manufacture and considerable wealth to acquire. Early Nordic swords, with their distinctive flanged hilts and carefully balanced blades, represented technological achievements that matched or exceeded contemporary weapons produced anywhere in Europe. These warrior chieftains established their authority through a combination of military prowess, economic control, and ritual leadership. They controlled access to bronze-working technology and raw materials, ensuring that weapons and high-status objects remained concentrated within their social circles. The distribution of bronze objects across the landscape reflects this centralised control, with major concentrations appearing around what were likely chiefly residences and ceremonial centres, while smaller settlements show much more limited access to metal goods. The warrior ethos that characterised these elite groups extended beyond simple military function to encompass broader concepts of honour, loyalty, and social obligation. Bronze Age rock art from sites throughout Scandinavia depicts armed warriors engaged in combat, ritual activities, and ceremonial processions. These images suggest that warfare had become ritualised and regulated, according to specific codes of conduct that emphasized individual heroism and martial skill. The standardization of weapon types and fighting techniques across the entire Nordic region indicates that warrior culture had become sufficiently institutionalized to maintain consistent practices across vast geographic areas. Religious and ceremonial activities provided another avenue through which elite groups consolidated their authority. Bronze Age communities invested enormous resources in ritual objects and ceremonial sites that served to legitimize social hierarchies and reinforce group identity. The famous Trundholm sun chariot, discovered in Denmark and dating to approximately 1400 BC, represents one of the most sophisticated Bronze Age ritual objects ever found. This wheeled bronze sculpture, featuring a gold-plated disc representing the sun drawn by a bronze horse, demonstrates both the technical capabilities of Nordic craftsmen and the complex cosmological beliefs that justified elite authority. The concentration of wealth and power within warrior chieftain classes created new forms of competition and conflict that shaped the development of Bronze Age society. Control over trade routes became a source of ongoing tension between different groups, leading to the construction of fortified settlements and the development of increasingly sophisticated military technologies. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Torslev in Denmark reveals defensive earthworks and weapon deposits that suggest organised warfare had become a regular feature of Bronze Age life. The competitive pressures and accumulated wealth that characterised early Nordic Bronze Age society created the conditions necessary for remarkable technological advancement. By 1500 BC, Nordic craftsmen had developed metalworking techniques that rivaled those found in the most advanced centres of European civilization. The transformation from simple copperworking to sophisticated bronze production required not merely access to raw materials, but the development of entirely new manufacturing processes, specialised tools, and technical knowledge that took generations to perfect. The earliest bronze objects produced in the Nordic region showed clear evidence of foreign influence, with forms and decorative motifs borrowed directly from Central European prototypes. However, Nordic craftsmen quickly began developing distinctive regional styles that reflected local aesthetic preferences and functional requirements. The evolution of bronze daggers provides a clear example of this technological progression. Initial Nordic daggers closely resembled Unitis culture weapons from Bohemia and central Germany, featuring simple flat blades attached to organic handles with bronze rivets. Within 2 centuries, Nordic smiths had developed their own characteristic dagger types, including the distinctive flange-hilted varieties that became hallmarks of Scandinavian bronze working. The mastery of lost wax casting represented perhaps the most significant technological breakthrough achieved by Nordic Bronze Age craftsmen. This complex process required the creation of detailed wax models that were then encased in clay moulds and heated until the wax melted away, leaving precise cavities into which molten bronze could be poured. The technique demanded exceptional skill in temperature control, alloy composition, and mould construction. Archaeological evidence from workshop sites at Hallunda in Sweden and Thai in Denmark reveals the sophisticated equipment used by Bronze Age smiths, including specialised furnaces capable of reaching temperatures exceeding 1000 degrees Celsius, bronze-tipped bellows for maintaining consistent airflow, and stone moulds for producing standardised ingots and tool blanks. The lost wax process enabled Nordic craftsmen to produce objects of extraordinary complexity and artistic refinement. Bronze razors from the period display intricate spiral decorations that would have been impossible to achieve through simple hammering or engraving techniques. The famous bronze lures, or ceremonial horns, found throughout Denmark and southern Sweden, represent the pinnacle of lost wax casting technology. These massive instruments, some measuring over 2 meters in length, required precise acoustic calculations to ensure proper tonal qualities. The largest lures contain over 10 kilograms of bronze and display decorative elements so fine that modern reproductions require advanced industrial techniques to replicate their quality. Sheet metal working developed alongside casting techniques, allowing Nordic smiths to create large decorative objects and functional items that would have required prohibitive amounts of bronze if produced through solid casting. The technique involved hammering bronze ingots into thin sheets that could then be shaped over wooden or stone forms to create vessels, shield bosses, and ornamental plates. Archaeological finds from Vunserepenge in Denmark include bronze cauldrons with walls less than 2 millimeters thick, demonstrating the exceptional skill required to work bronze to such precise specifications without causing fractures or weak points. The decorative spiral motifs that became characteristic of Nordic Bronze Age metalwork reflected both aesthetic preferences and technical capabilities. These designs served multiple functions beyond simple ornamentation. The raised spiral patterns strengthened thin bronze sheets by creating structural ridges that distributed stress more effectively across the metal surface. The spirals also provided textural elements that enhanced grip on weapons and tools, particularly important for bronze handles that could become slippery when wet. Most significantly, the spiral motifs carried deep symbolic meaning within Nordic Bronze Age cosmology, representing concepts of cyclical time, solar movement, and the connection between earthly and divine realms. The consistency of spiral motifs across the entire Nordic Bronze Age cultural zone indicates sophisticated systems for transmitting technical knowledge and artistic traditions. Craftsmen appear to have undergone formal apprenticeships that standardized both manufacturing techniques and decorative styles. Bronze objects from sites separated by hundreds of kilometers display remarkably similar construction methods and ornamental details, suggesting that master smiths travelled extensively to train apprentices and establish workshops in new locations. The distribution of distinctive tool types, particularly the specialized hammers and punches used for creating spiral decorations, supports this interpretation of organized knowledge transfer. The economic importance of amber in sustaining these technological developments cannot be overstated. While bronze required expensive imported raw materials, amber represented a renewable resource that Nordic communities could harvest directly from their own coastlines. The Baltic Sea shores, particularly along the Jutland Peninsula and the coast of Prussia, provided virtually unlimited quantities of amber through natural processes of erosion and storm action. Beach walking after severe weather could yield substantial quantities of high-quality amber pieces suitable for working into jewellery and decorative objects. Nordic communities developed sophisticated techniques for working amber that maximised its value in international trade. Raw amber pieces were carefully sorted according to size, clarity and colour, with the finest specimens reserved for the most valuable finished products. Craftsmen learned to heat amber to precise temperatures that made it malleable enough to shape without causing fractures or discoloration. The technique of amber inlay work, where small pieces of amber were fitted into bronze settings, created composite objects that combined the beauty of both materials while demonstrating the technical skill of their creators. The amber trade networks that developed during the Nordic Bronze Age connected Scandinavia to markets throughout Europe and the Mediterranean world. Archaeological evidence from Mycenaean Greece includes amber beads that originated in the Baltic region, indicating trade connections spanning over 2,000 kilometres. Egyptian tomb paintings from the New Kingdom period depict foreign tribute bearers presenting amber objects to pharaonic courts, suggesting that Nordic amber reached even the most distant corners of the ancient world. These extensive trade networks required sophisticated systems of quality control, standardized weights and measures, and reliable transportation methods. The development of maritime technology represented another crucial element in the success of Nordic Bronze Age trade networks. The transition from simple dugout canoes to sophisticated plank-built vessels enabled communities to transport heavy cargoes of bronze objects and amber across the Baltic Sea and along the Atlantic coasts of Europe. Archaeological evidence from Hjortspring in Denmark, dating to the later Bronze Age, reveals advanced boat-building techniques that produced vessels capable of carrying substantial loads while maintaining the speed and manoeuvrability necessary for both trade and warfare. Early Nordic Bronze Age boats evolved from Neolithic traditions of dugout canoe construction. but incorporated new techniques that dramatically improved their capabilities. The use of overlapping planks, secured with bronze rivets and caulked with animal hair and tar, created hulls that were both watertight and flexible enough to handle rough seas. These clinker-built vessels could be constructed in much larger sizes than dugout canoes, with some examples reaching lengths of over 20 metres. The addition of removable masts and square-rigged sails enabled crews to take advantage of favourable winds while retaining the option of rowing when necessary. Navigation techniques developed alongside improvements in vessel construction, allowing Nordic mariners to undertake increasingly ambitious voyages. The consistent orientation of Bronze Age rock art ships suggests that navigators had developed reliable methods for determining direction and position at sea. Archaeological evidence indicates the use of sun compasses, simple devices that use shadow patterns to maintain consistent headings during daylight hours. Knowledge of seasonal star patterns, ocean currents, and bird migration routes provided additional navigational aids that enabled mariners to reach distant destinations with reasonable reliability. The famous rock carvings at Tanum in western Sweden provide detailed depictions of Bronze Age ships and maritime activities. These images reveal vessels with distinctive prow and stern decorations, often featuring animal heads or geometric designs that may have served both decorative and practical functions. The ships depicted in Tanum carvings show crews of varying sizes, from small vessels operated by 2 or 3 individuals to large ships requiring dozens of rowers. The presence of weapons and shields in many ship carvings suggests that these vessels served military as well as commercial functions. The Trundholm's Sun chariot, discovered in a Danish bog in 1902, represents one of the most remarkable achievements of Nordic Bronze Age craftsmanship and provides crucial insights into the religious and cosmological beliefs that motivated such technological innovation. Dating to approximately 1400 BC, this bronze sculpture consists of a 6-wheeled cart drawn by a bronze horse, supporting a large bronze disc decorated with spiral patterns and covered on one side with a thin layer of gold. The entire assemblage measures 54 centimetres in length and weighs nearly 4 kilograms, representing a substantial investment in both materials and skilled labour. The technical sophistication of the Trundholm chariot demonstrates the full range of bronze working techniques available to Nordic craftsmen. The horse figure was created through lost wax casting, with fine details including individual hairs in the mane and decorative harness elements. The wheels were constructed using a combination of casting and sheet metal work, with bronze spokes fitted into cast bronze hubs and surrounded by thin bronze rims. The sun disk itself represents perhaps the most technically challenging element, requiring precise control of gold working techniques to create the thin foil overlay without wrinkles or gaps. The symbolic significance of the Trundholm chariot extends beyond its technical achievements to provide insights into Bronze Age cosmological beliefs. The contrast between the gold-covered side of the disc and the plain bronze reverse suggests concepts of day and night, with the chariot representing the sun's daily journey across the sky. The spiral decorations that cover both sides of the disc reflect the same motifs found on contemporary bronze objects throughout the Nordic region, indicating shared symbolic systems that unified diverse communities under common religious and cultural frameworks. The Egtved burial, discovered in Denmark in 1921, provides complementary evidence of Nordic Bronze Age technological and artistic achievements. Dating to approximately 1370 BC, this remarkably preserved burial contained the remains of a young woman dressed in elaborate woolen clothing and accompanied by bronze ornaments of exceptional quality. The preservation conditions in the oak coffin burial allowed organic materials to survive, providing unprecedented insights into Bronze Age textile production and personal ornamentation. The bronze objects recovered from the Egtved burial demonstrate the full range of metalworking techniques available to Nordic craftsmen. A bronze belt plate features intricate spiral decorations, created through a combination of casting and engraving, with detail so fine that they require magnification to fully appreciate. bronze arm rings show evidence of careful finishing work, with surfaces polished to mirror-like brilliance and edges smoothed to prevent damage to clothing or skin. A bronze awl, probably used for leather working, displays the functional excellence that characterised Nordic Bronze Age tools, with a sharp point that remains effective after over 3 millennia. The woolen textiles preserved in the Egdud burial reveal equally sophisticated production techniques. The woman's dress was constructed from fine woolen fabric woven in complex patterns that required advanced loom technology and exceptional skill in thread preparation. Bronze buttons and decorative elements were integrated into the fabric during construction, creating garments that served as displays of both textile craftsmanship and metalworking expertise. The combination of imported bronze ornaments with locally produced textiles demonstrates the integration of international trade goods into everyday life among elite Bronze Age communities. Archaeological evidence from workshop sites throughout the Nordic Bronze Age cultural zone reveals the organisational systems that supported these technological achievements. Bronze working required not only skilled craftsmen, but also supporting specialists including charcoal producers, mould makers, and finishing workers. The concentration of bronze production in specific locations suggests that communities developed specialised manufacturing centres that served regional markets rather than attempting to maintain bronze working capabilities in every settlement. The workshop excavations at Pile in Sweden provide detailed evidence of Bronze Age manufacturing organisation. The site contains remains of multiple furnaces, large quantities of bronze scrap and casting waste, and specialised tools for metalworking. The archaeological deposits suggest continuous occupation by bronze-working specialists over several generations, with techniques and knowledge passed down through family lineages. Similar workshop sites at Thai in Denmark and Voldtoft in southern Sweden confirm that bronze production had become sufficiently specialised to support full-time craftsmen who devoted their entire careers to metalworking. The quality control systems that ensured consistent standards across Nordic Bronze Age metalwork required sophisticated understanding of alloy composition and manufacturing techniques. Chemical analysis of bronze objects from different regions reveals remarkably consistent copper-tin ratios, typically ranging between 8 and 12% tin content. This consistency could only have been achieved through careful measurement and standardized production methods. The development of standard alloy compositions also facilitated recycling of bronze objects, allowing craftsmen to melt down damaged or obsolete items to create new products without compromising quality. The sophisticated bronzeworking techniques and extensive trade networks that characterized the mature Nordic Bronze Age created the foundation for increasingly complex social stratification. By 1400 BC, archaeological evidence reveals the emergence of a distinct warrior elite whose power derived from their control over metal production, trade routes, and military technology. This transformation represented a fundamental shift from the relatively egalitarian societies of the earlier Bronze Age, establishing hierarchical systems that would influence Scandinavian social organisation for centuries to come. The weapons that defined this warrior class represented the pinnacle of Nordic Bronze Age metallurgical achievement. The distinctive Nordic sword types that emerged during this period demonstrate both technical sophistication and standardized production methods that suggest centralized control over weapon manufacture. The earliest Nordic swords, appearing around 1600 BC, evolved from Central European prototypes, but quickly developed characteristic regional features that distinguished them from contemporary weapons produced elsewhere in Europe. The Type I Nordic swords, dating to approximately 1600 to 1500 BC, featured broad leaf-shaped blades with pronounced central ridges that provided structural strength while maintaining relatively light weight. These weapons measured between 60 and 80 centimetres in total length, with blades accounting for roughly 2/3 of their overall dimensions. The tangs, designed to fit into organic handles secured with bronze rivets, showed careful attention to balance and ergonomics. Chemical analysis reveals consistent alloy compositions averaging 10, 11% tin, indicating quality control standards that required sophisticated understanding of metallurgy. The evolution to Type II swords around 1500 BC marked a significant advancement in both design and manufacturing techniques. These weapons featured narrower blades with more pronounced tapering toward the point, creating superior thrusting capabilities while maintaining effective cutting edges. The development of flanged hilts, cast as integral parts of the blade rather than attached separately, eliminated weak points that had plagued earlier designs. The bronze hilts often incorporated decorative spiral motifs that served both aesthetic and functional purposes, providing improved grip while displaying the symbolic elements central to Nordic Bronze Age cosmology. Type III swords, appearing around 1300 BC, represented the culmination of Nordic sword development. These weapons featured complex hilt constructions with multiple bronze elements including pommel caps, grip sections, and guard plates. The blades showed increasingly sophisticated metallurgical techniques, with some examples displaying pattern welding or controlled carbon content variations that created superior cutting edges. The overall length of Type III swords increased to 100 centimeters, reflecting improved bronze supply chains that made larger weapons economically feasible. The production of these swords required exceptional skill and represented enormous investments in both raw materials and labour. A typical Type III sword contained approximately 800 grams of bronze, equivalent to the metal content of dozens of smaller tools or ornaments. The manufacturing process involved multiple stages of casting, forging, grinding, and polishing that could require weeks of work by skilled craftsmen. The consistent quality of Nordic swords across the entire cultural zone indicates that weapon production was concentrated in specialised workshops under the control of elite patrons who could afford such substantial investments. Spear technology developed alongside sword production, creating complementary weapon systems that equipped Nordic warriors for different tactical situations. Bronze spearheads from the period display remarkable variety in size and form, ranging from light javelins designed for throwing to heavy thrusting spears intended for close combat. The socketed construction typical of Nordic spearheads required sophisticated casting techniques to create the hollow bronze sockets that fitted over wooden shafts. The sockets were often reinforced with bronze loops or rings that prevented splitting of the wooden hafts under combat stress. The largest Nordic spearheads, measuring up to 50 centimeters in length, represented formidable weapons that combined the reach advantages of polearms with the cutting power of swords. These massive points required substantial bronze investments and demonstrated the wealth and status of their owners. Archaeological context suggests that the largest spearheads served ceremonial as well as practical functions, appearing in ritual deposits and elite burials where their symbolic significance equaled their military utility. Axe technology during the Nordic Bronze Age reflected both practical tool requirements and symbolic warrior traditions inherited from earlier battle axe cultures. Bronze axes evolved from simple flat designs to sophisticated socketed forms that provided superior hafting strength and versatility. The development of flanged axes around 1400 BC created weapons that combined effective cutting edges with decorative elements that displayed the metalworking skills of their creators. The ceremonial aspects of Nordic Bronze Age axes became increasingly elaborate as the period progressed. Examples from elite contexts feature intricate decorative schemes, including spiral motifs, geometric patterns, and occasionally figural representations. The famous axes from Smårumofre in Denmark display complex decorative programs that transform functional weapons into artistic masterpieces. These ceremonial axes often show minimal wear patterns, suggesting that their primary function involved display and ritual rather than practical, combat or tool use. Defensive equipment represented another crucial element of warrior technology, though the organic materials used in shield and armour construction have rarely survived in archaeological contexts. Bronze shield bosses and rim fittings provide evidence for sophisticated defensive systems that complemented the offensive weapons of the warrior elite. The shield bosses, typically measuring 15-20 centimeters in diameter, were designed to deflect weapon strikes while providing secure attachment points for leather or wooden shield bodies. Archaeological evidence from sites like Herzsprung in Germany reveals bronze cuirasses that protected the torso of elite warriors. These armour pieces, constructed from sheet bronze using techniques similar to those employed in cauldron production, required careful fitting to individual wearers and substantial bronze investments. The rarity of such armour pieces suggests that they were restricted to the highest levels of the warrior hierarchy, serving as much to display wealth and status as to provide battlefield protection. The burial practices of the Nordic Bronze Age provide the clearest evidence for the social stratification that accompanied the rise of warrior elites. The contrast between simple cremation burials and elaborate barrow interments reveals dramatic differences in social status that had not existed during earlier periods. The simplest burials of the period consisted of cremated remains placed in ceramic urns with minimal grave goods, typically including only basic bronze pins, razors, or small tools. At the opposite extreme, the great barrow burials of the elite required enormous labour investments and contained grave goods worth fortunes in contemporary terms. The Borremeshoj mounds in Denmark, constructed around 1400 BC, demonstrate the scale of resources that elite families could command. Each mound required the movement of thousands of cubic meters of earth and stone, representing months of labour by large work crews. The preservation conditions within these mounds allowed organic materials to survive, providing unprecedented insights into elite burial practices and material culture. The primary burial at Borremeshoj contained the remains of a man dressed in a woolen tunic and cap, accompanied by a bronze sword, dagger, belt ornaments, and a distinctive bronze-bound wooden cup. The sword, measuring 75 centimeters in length, displayed exceptional craftsmanship with intricate spiral decorations on the hilt and a blade polished to mirror brightness. The dagger, worn at the belt alongside the sword, featured a cast bronze hilt with organic grip elements secured by bronze rivets. The belt itself incorporated multiple bronze ornaments including decorated plates, rings, and a large circular boss that served as both functional and decorative elements. The secondary burials within the same mound contained the remains of a woman and child, both dressed in elaborate woolen garments with bronze ornaments. The woman wore a bronze belt with hanging ornaments, arm rings, and a bronze pin that secured her cloak. The child's burial included miniature bronze objects that may have represented toys or symbols of future adult status. The presence of multiple burials within single mounds suggests family-based elite groups that maintained their status across generations. The distribution of barrow burials across the Nordic Bronze Age landscape reveals patterns of territorial control and social organisation. The largest and richest barrows cluster in specific regions, particularly in Jutland, Zealand and Skåne, suggesting that these areas served as centres of elite power. The spacing between major barrow groups corresponds roughly to distances that could be controlled by individual chieftains or ruling families, indicating territorial divisions that may have persisted for centuries. The role of warrior chiefs in controlling trade routes becomes evident through the distribution of exotic imports in elite burials. Objects of foreign manufacture, including Central European bronze types, amber from distant Baltic shores, and occasionally items from even more remote regions, appear almost exclusively in the richest graves. This pattern suggests that access to long-distance trade networks was restricted to the highest levels of society, providing warrior chiefs with both economic advantages and symbols of their international connections. The concentration of bronze-working workshops near elite burial sites indicates direct control over metal production by warrior chief families. Archaeological evidence from sites like Thai in Denmark reveals bronze workshops located within easy reach of major barrow cemeteries, suggesting that metal production served the immediate needs of local elites before supplying broader regional markets. The standardization of weapon types across the Nordic region required coordination between different workshop centers, implying networks of communication and cooperation among elite groups. The warrior chiefs appear to have maintained their authority through a combination of military leadership, economic control, and ritual functions. Rock art depictions from sites throughout Scandinavia show armed figures engaged in ceremonial activities, suggesting that warrior status involved religious as well as secular responsibilities. The consistent appearance of weapon motifs in rock art indicates that martial identity had become central to elite self-representation and social legitimacy. The gender roles evident in Nordic Bronze Age burial practices reveal complex systems of status and authority that extended beyond simple male warrior dominance. While the most elaborate weapon burials typically contain male remains, female elite burials demonstrate that women could achieve high status through different pathways. The analysis of female burials reveals distinctive patterns of grave goods that suggest specialized roles within elite society. The EGT Vedgirl burial provides exceptional insights into female elite status during the Nordic Bronze Age. Dating to approximately 1370 BC, this burial contained the remarkably preserved remains of a young woman aged 16, 18 years at death. The preservation conditions allowed detailed analysis of her clothing, ornaments, and associated grave goods, revealing the material culture of elite women during this period. The bronze objects accompanying the Eggtvedgirl included a large belt plate decorated with intricate spiral motifs, demonstrating the same high-quality metalworking found in male elite burials. The belt plate, measuring 23 centimeters in diameter, required substantial bronze investment and exceptional craftsmanship to produce. Chemical analysis reveals alloy compositions consistent with the finest bronze objects of the period, indicating that female elites had access to the same quality materials as their male counterparts. The woolen textiles preserved in the Eggtved burial reveal sophisticated production techniques that suggest specialized female craft traditions. The woman's dress was constructed from fine woolen fabric woven in complex patterns that required advanced loom technology and exceptional skill in thread preparation. The integration of bronze ornaments into the textile construction demonstrates coordination between male-dominated metalworking and female-controlled textile production, suggesting complementary rather than competitive gender roles within elite society. The presence of a small bronze awl in the Eggtved burial indicates that elite women maintained involvement in craft production even after achieving high status. The awl, used for leatherworking and textile production, shows wear patterns consistent with regular use, suggesting that craft skills remained important aspects of female identity even among the elite. This pattern contrasts with male elite burials, where tools typically appear as symbols rather than functional implements. Other female elite burials from the period reveal similar patterns of high-status grave goods, combined with evidence for craft specialization. The Skridstrup burial from Denmark contained bronze ornaments comparable to those found with the Eggtvedgirl, including arm rings, belt fittings, and decorative pins. The preservation of organic materials revealed woolen garments of exceptional quality, including a complex hairnet constructed from horsehair threads and decorated with bronze spirals. The distribution of female elite burials across the Nordic Bronze Age landscape suggests that high-status women were not concentrated in the same locations as the richest male warrior burials. This pattern may indicate marriage alliances that connected different elite groups across regional boundaries, with women serving as links between otherwise separate power centres. The consistency of female elite material culture across wide geographic areas supports this interpretation, suggesting shared traditions that transcended local territorial divisions. The analysis of bronze ornament types found in female burials reveals standardized production systems that paralleled weapon manufacture in their sophistication and quality control. Female-associated bronze objects, including belt plates, arm rings, and fibulae, display the same technical excellence and decorative consistency found in male weapons. This pattern indicates that bronze working workshops produced goods for both male and female elite markets, suggesting integrated production systems rather than gender-specific craft specializations. The The symbolic elements present in female elite burials provide insights into the religious and cosmological roles of high-status women. The spiral motifs that dominate female bronze ornaments mirror those found on male weapons and ritual objects, indicating shared symbolic systems that unified elite material culture across gender lines. The presence of sun symbols and other cosmological elements in female contexts suggests that elite women participated in the religious activities that legitimize social hierarchies. The evidence for female craft specialization extends beyond textile production to include other high-status activities. Bronze razors found in some female burials may indicate involvement in ritual grooming or medical practices. The presence of amberworking tools in female contexts suggests that women controlled important aspects of amber processing and trade, activities that were crucial to the economic foundations of Nordic Bronze Age society. The age patterns evident in female elite burials reveal important aspects of social organisation and status acquisition. Many of the richest female burials, including the Egtved girl, contain the remains of relatively young women, suggesting that high status could be achieved early in life through birth or marriage, rather than through the gradual accumulation of wealth and authority typical of male careers. This pattern indicates that female elite status often derived from family connections rather than individual achievements. The territorial control exercised by warrior chiefs extended beyond simple military dominance to encompass sophisticated systems of resource management and population control. The distribution of bronze objects across the landscape reveals hierarchical networks that channeled wealth and prestige goods from local production centres to elite consumption sites. The concentration of the finest bronze objects in elite burials suggests that warrior chiefs maintained effective control over craft production and trade networks throughout their territories. The evidence for specialised bronze production centres indicates that warrior chiefs invested substantial resources in developing manufacturing capabilities within their controlled territories. The workshop sites at Thigh and Pile represent major industrial installations that required significant initial investments and ongoing support to maintain operations. The location of these workshops near elite burial sites suggests direct patronage relationships between warrior chiefs and master craftsmen. The standardization of bronze object types across the Nordic region required coordination between different elite groups and their associated workshops. The consistent quality and stylistic elements found in bronze objects from widely separated sites indicate communication networks that facilitated technology transfer and maintained production standards. These networks likely operated through formal alliances between warrior chief families, creating political and economic relationships that transcended local territorial boundaries. The elaborate material culture and complex social hierarchies that defined Nordic Bronze Age society reflected underlying religious and cosmological systems of remarkable sophistication. The spiritual beliefs that governed these communities extended far beyond simple ancestor worship or nature reverence, encompassing complex astronomical knowledge, elaborate ritual practices, and symbolic systems that unified diverse populations across vast geographic territories. Archaeological evidence reveals that religious activities permeated every aspect of Bronze Age life, from the decoration of everyday objects to the construction of monumental ceremonial sites that required enormous communal investments. The rock art traditions that flourished throughout Scandinavia during the Bronze Age provide the most extensive surviving evidence of Nordic spiritual beliefs and practices. These carved images, numbering in the tens of thousands across sites from Alta in northern Norway to Simris in southern Sweden, represent one of Europe's largest concentrations of prehistoric art. The consistency of motifs and artistic conventions across this vast geographic range indicates shared religious traditions that transcended local political and cultural boundaries. The Turnham Rock Art Complex in Bohuslän, western Sweden, contains over 3,000 individual carvings distributed across more than 600 separate panels, making it the largest and most diverse collection of Bronze Age rock art in Scandinavia. The site's location on what were then islands and coastal promontories in the Skagerrak demonstrates the intimate connection between Bronze Age religious practices and maritime activities. The carvings at Tanum span the entire Bronze Age period, with the earliest images dating to approximately 1700 BC, and the latest additions continuing into the early Iron Age around 500 BC. The ship motifs that dominate Tanum and other Scandinavian rock art sites reveal the central importance of maritime technology and seafaring in Bronze Age cosmology. These vessels, depicted in profile with characteristic curved prows and sterns, appear in contexts ranging from simple transportation scenes to elaborate ritual processions involving dozens of participants. The ships vary dramatically in size and crew complement, from small vessels operated by 2 or 3 figures to massive craft requiring 20 or more rowers. The largest ship carvings at Tanum measure over 4 meters in length, suggesting that these images represented idealized or mythological vessels rather than accurate depictions of contemporary boats. The artistic conventions used to depict Bronze Age ships reveal sophisticated understanding of symbolic representation and narrative composition. The vessels typically appear as single-line drawings showing the hull profile with vertical strokes representing crew members. The prows and sterns often feature elaborate decorative elements, including animal heads, spiral motifs, and geometric designs that mirror the ornamental systems found on contemporary bronze objects. Some ships display masts and rigging, indicating that the artists were familiar with sailing technology, even when depicting vessels under oar power. The contextual associations of ship carvings provide insights into their religious and ceremonial significance. Many vessels appear in procession scenes, where multiple ships follow identical courses across the rock surfaces, suggesting ritual journeys or ceremonial voyages. The association of ships with human figures engaged in various activities, including apparent ritual dances, weapon displays, and sexual acts, indicates that maritime imagery served broader symbolic functions beyond simple transportation documentation. The warrior figures that appear throughout Scandinavian rock art demonstrate the religious dimensions of Bronze Age martial culture. These armed figures, typically depicted with swords, spears, axes, and shields, engage in combat scenes, ritual dances, and ceremonial processions that reveal the spiritual significance of warrior identity. The consistent artistic conventions used to represent warriors across different sites indicate standardized iconographic traditions that communicated specific religious and social meanings. The combat scenes depicted in Bronze Age rock art follow recognizable patterns that suggest ritualized rather than chaotic warfare. Warriors typically appear in pairs or small groups, engaged in formal duels or structured battles that emphasize individual skill and heroism. The weapons depicted in these scenes correspond closely to archaeological finds from contemporary sites, indicating that the artists accurately represented the military technology of their time. The presence of apparent referees or observers in some combat scenes suggests that warfare had become ceremonially regulated according to specific codes of conduct. The ritual aspects of warrior imagery become particularly evident in scenes depicting armed figures engaged in apparent religious activities. Warriors appear as participants in processions, as guardians of sacred sites, and as central figures in complex ceremonial compositions that include ships, animals, and astronomical symbols. The integration of martial and religious imagery indicates that warrior status involved spiritual as well as secular responsibilities, with elite fighters serving as intermediaries between human communities and divine powers. Animal imagery in Nordic Bronze Age rock art reveals complex relationships between human communities and the natural world that surrounded them. The most common animal representations include horses, cattle, deer, wild boar, and various bird species, each appearing in specific contexts that suggest distinct symbolic meanings. The artistic treatment of these animals ranges from naturalistic depictions that accurately represent anatomical details to highly stylized forms that emphasize particular characteristics or symbolic associations. Horse imagery holds particular significance in Bronze Age rock art, appearing in contexts that range from practical transportation to elaborate religious ceremonies. The horses depicted at Tanum and other sites often appear as draft animals pulling wheeled vehicles, including both practical carts and ceremonial chariots. The association of horses with sun symbols and other astronomical motifs suggests that these animals played important roles in Bronze Age cosmological beliefs, possibly representing divine messengers or vehicles for celestial journeys. The wild animals depicted in rock art provide insights into the environmental conditions and hunting practices of Bronze Age Scandinavia. Red deer appear frequently in hunting scenes that show human figures armed with bows and spears pursuing individual animals or entire herds. The artistic treatment of these scenes suggests that hunting retained important ritual dimensions, even as agricultural production became the primary subsistence strategy. The presence of antlered figures that combine human and animal characteristics indicates shamanistic traditions that involved spiritual transformation and communication with animal spirits. Solar symbols represent perhaps the most widespread and consistent element in Nordic Bronze Age rock art, appearing in various forms across sites throughout Scandinavia. These symbols range from simple, circular designs to elaborate compositions featuring radiating lines, spiral elements, and complex geometric patterns. The consistency of solar imagery across different artistic traditions indicates that sun worship formed a central element of Bronze Age religious beliefs throughout the Nordic cultural zone. The most common solar symbols consist of circles with radiating lines that clearly represent the sun and its rays. These images appear in isolation and as components of larger compositions that include ships, warriors, and animals. The contextual associations of solar symbols reveal their integration into broader narrative and ceremonial programs. Ships frequently display solar discs as decorative elements or cargo, suggesting that maritime activities involve the transportation of sacred solar symbols or the ritual reenactment of celestial journeys. The spiral motifs that appear throughout Nordic Bronze Age art represent sophisticated understanding of cyclical time and astronomical phenomena. These spirals range from simple single-turn designs to complex compositions featuring multiple interlocking elements that create elaborate geometric patterns. The mathematical precision evident in many spiral compositions indicates advanced understanding of geometric principles and careful planning in their execution. The astronomical knowledge demonstrated through Bronze Age artifacts extends far beyond simple solar observation to encompass sophisticated understanding of celestial cycles and seasonal changes. The Trundholm Sun Chariot represents the most famous example of Bronze Age astronomical artifacts, but numerous other objects reveal equally advanced understanding of celestial phenomena. Bronze razors from the period often feature decorative schemes that incorporate astronomical symbols, including representations of the sun, moon, and star patterns that correspond to observable celestial configurations. The Nibra sky disk, discovered in Saxony but incorporating materials and artistic traditions from across northern Europe, demonstrates the international scope of Bronze Age astronomical knowledge. This bronze disk, decorated with gold inlays representing the sun, moon, and star clusters, provides direct evidence for sophisticated astronomical observation and record-keeping. The disk's construction required coordination between craftsmen familiar with different metalworking traditions, suggesting networks of technical and religious knowledge that transcended political boundaries. The seasonal orientation of many Bronze Age monuments and rock art sites reveals systematic astronomical observations that guided religious and agricultural activities. The alignment of stone ship settings and other ceremonial monuments with solar and stellar events indicates that Bronze Age communities maintained detailed calendrical systems that coordinated religious festivals with agricultural cycles and seasonal changes. Water held profound religious significance in Nordic Bronze Age spiritual systems, serving as a medium for communication with divine powers and a repository for sacred objects. the extensive evidence for votive deposits in bogs, lakes and rivers throughout Scandinavia reveals systematic practices of ritual deposition that continue throughout the Bronze Age period. These deposits represent some of the largest concentrations of Bronze Age metalwork ever discovered, indicating enormous investments in religious activities. The bog deposits at Fardal in Denmark contained over 100 bronze objects, including weapons, tools, ornaments and ceremonial items that represent substantial wealth accumulations. The objects show evidence of deliberate damage before deposition, with swords bent or broken and other items rendered functionally useless. This intentional destruction indicates that the deposits served ritual rather than practical storage functions, with the objects permanently removed from circulation as offerings to supernatural powers. The types of objects selected for water deposits reveal specific patterns that illuminate Bronze Age religious beliefs. Weapons appear disproportionately in votive deposits, particularly high-quality swords and spears that represent significant material investments. The selection of the finest available weapons for ritual deposition suggests that martial prowess held religious as well as social significance, with successful warriors obligated to share their achievements with divine patrons through substantial offerings. The lure horns found in Danish and Swedish bogs represent another category of ritual deposits with specifically religious functions. These massive bronze instruments, weighing up to 10 kilograms each and measuring over 2 meters in length, required exceptional technical skill to produce and enormous bronze investments to create. The acoustic properties of lures indicate that they were designed to produce specific tonal qualities suitable for ceremonial rather than practical communication purposes. The discovery of lure pairs in bog contexts suggests that these instruments functioned in coordinated performances that may have accompanied major religious ceremonies. The technical requirements for playing lures demanded specialized training and considerable physical strength, indicating that their operation was restricted to trained specialists. The decoration of lure horns with the same spiral motifs found on other Bronze Age religious objects confirms their integration into broader symbolic systems. The geographical distribution of water deposits reveals patterns that correspond to territorial divisions and settlement hierarchies evident in other aspects of Bronze Age society. The largest and richest deposits cluster in regions that also contain the most elaborate elite burials and evidence for specialized bronze production, suggesting that ritual deposition served to legitimize social hierarchies and territorial claims. The investment of substantial wealth in water deposits may have demonstrated the prosperity and divine favor enjoyed by particular communities or elite groups. The seasonal timing of ritual deposits, where this can be determined through archaeological evidence, indicates coordination with agricultural cycles and astronomical events. The deposition of bronze objects during specific seasons may have served to ensure favourable weather, successful harvests, or protection from natural disasters. The integration of ritual deposition with seasonal cycles demonstrates the sophisticated understanding of natural phenomena that characterize Bronze Age religious systems. Sacred landscapes and ceremonial sites throughout the Nordic Bronze Age cultural zone reveal sophisticated understanding of topographic and astronomical relationships that guided the placement of religious monuments. The stone ship settings that appear throughout Scandinavia represent one of the most distinctive forms of Bronze Age ceremonial architecture, combining maritime symbolism with astronomical alignments to create complex sacred spaces. The stone ship at Alestenar in southern Sweden, measuring 67 metres in length and consisting of 59 standing stones, demonstrates the monumental scale that Bronze Age communities could achieve in their ceremonial constructions. The precise astronomical alignments of this monument, with its long axis oriented towards sunrise and sunset at the winter and summer solstices, reveal sophisticated astronomical knowledge and careful planning in its construction. The effort required to transport and erect the massive stones indicates community-wide participation in religious activities. The smaller stone ship settings found throughout Denmark and Sweden display similar astronomical orientations and construction techniques. suggesting standardized religious practices that were maintained across wide geographic areas. The consistent use of maritime symbolism in these monuments confirms the central importance of seafaring in Bronze Age cosmology and religious belief systems. The ceremonial bronze deposits found at major religious sites provide additional evidence for the scale and sophistication of Bronze Age ritual activities. The Pile site in Sweden contained hundreds of bronze objects deposited in carefully arranged patterns that suggest systematic ritual procedures. The objects include weapons, tools, ornaments, and ceremonial items that represent enormous wealth accumulations, indicating that religious activity has commanded substantial economic resources. The ritual destruction of bronze objects before deposition appears to have followed specific procedures that rendered the items permanently unusable while preserving their symbolic significance. Swords were typically bent or broken at specific points, axes had their cutting edges damaged, and ornamental objects were deliberately deformed. These destruction patterns suggest standardized ritual procedures that were maintained across different sites and time periods. The integration of bronze deposits with other ceremonial activities, including cremation burials and stone monument construction, reveals complex religious programs that coordinated multiple forms of ritual expression. The timing and sequence of different ceremonial activities appear to have followed established protocols that ensured proper religious observances and maintained community relationships with supernatural powers. The evidence for specialized religious practitioners in Nordic Bronze Age society includes the presence of distinctive ritual objects and burial contexts that suggest professional religious roles. The bronze razors decorated with complex symbolic programs may have served ritual as well as practical functions, with their elaborate decorative schemes indicating specialized religious knowledge. The consistent quality and symbolic content of these objects across wide geographic areas suggests standardized training and shared religious traditions among Bronze Age ritual specialists. The astronomical alignments and symbolic programs evident in Bronze Age religious sites demonstrate sophisticated intellectual achievements that required specialized knowledge and careful planning. The coordination of multiple symbolic systems, including solar imagery, maritime motifs, and astronomical alignments, indicates that Bronze Age religious practitioners possessed advanced understanding of natural phenomena and symbolic representation. These achievements represent some of the earliest evidence for systematic astronomical observation and religious architecture in Northern European prehistory. The sophisticated religious and ceremonial systems that characterized mature Nordic Bronze Age society required substantial agricultural surpluses to support specialized craftsmen, warriors, and religious practitioners. The transition from the predominantly pastoral economies of the early Bronze Age to the intensive mixed farming systems that emerged around 1400 BC represented a fundamental transformation in subsistence strategies that enabled population growth and territorial expansion throughout Scandinavia. This agricultural revolution involved not merely the adoption of new crops or farming techniques, but the development of comprehensive land management systems that maximize productivity while maintaining long-term sustainability. Archaeological evidence from sites across Denmark and southern Sweden reveals the systematic establishment of permanent field systems during the subboreal climatic period, roughly 1500–800 BC. These field systems, preserved as fossil landscapes beneath later agricultural deposits, demonstrate sophisticated understanding of soil management, drainage, and crop rotation that enabled sustained intensive cultivation. The field boundaries, marked by stone walls and earthen banks, created parcels ranging from 0.5 to 2 hectares in size, optimal dimensions for the agricultural technology available during the Bronze Age. The excavations at Bjerre in Jutland have revealed one of the most complete Bronze Age field systems yet discovered, consisting of over 40 individual plots arranged in a grid pattern covering approximately 50 hectares. The field boundaries show evidence for multiple construction phases, indicating that the system developed gradually over several generations. Soil analysis from within the ancient fields reveals evidence for manuring, crop rotation, and systematic weed control that maintained soil fertility despite intensive cultivation. The presence of bronze sickles and other agricultural tools in associated settlement contexts confirms that these fields supported communities with access to metal technology. The development of systematic manuring practices represented a crucial innovation that enabled sustained intensive agriculture. Archaeological deposits from Bronze Age settlements contain substantial quantities of animal dung mixed with household refuse, straw, and other organic materials that were systematically applied to cultivated fields. The analysis of ancient soil samples reveals elevated phosphate levels and other chemical signatures that indicate regular manure application over extended periods. This practice required careful coordination between animal husbandry and crop production, demonstrating sophisticated understanding of agricultural chemistry. The crop assemblages recovered from Bronze Age sites reveal diversified agricultural systems that combined cereal cultivation with legume production and specialised crops for textile and craft production. Barley remained the dominant cereal throughout the period, particularly the 6-row hulled varieties that thrived in Scandinavian climatic conditions. However, the appearance of wheat cultivation in southern Denmark and Skåne indicates agricultural intensification and possibly status differentiation, as wheat required better soils and more favourable growing conditions than barley. The cultivation of emmer wheat at sites like Bjerre and Sarup demonstrates that Bronze Age farmers had developed techniques for growing this demanding crop in marginal northern environments. Emmer requires careful soil preparation, regular weeding and protection from pests that made it considerably more labour-intensive than barley cultivation. The investment in emmer production suggests that Bronze Age communities valued wheat for specific purposes, possibly including ritual consumption or trade with elite groups who preferred wheat-based foods. The legume cultivation that appears in Bronze Age agricultural assemblages provided crucial protein supplementation and soil improvement through nitrogen fixation. Field peas and broad beans appear in substantial quantities at settlement sites throughout Denmark and southern Sweden, indicating systematic cultivation rather than casual gathering. The integration of legumes into crop rotation systems demonstrates sophisticated understanding of soil chemistry and plant nutrition that enabled sustained productivity without external fertilizer inputs. Flax cultivation became increasingly important during the later Bronze Age, providing raw materials for textile production that complemented wool from domesticated sheep. The processing of flax required specialised knowledge and equipment, including retting ponds for fibre preparation and stone weights for loom operation. The presence of flax processing facilities at Bronze Age settlements indicates that textile production had become sufficiently important to warrant dedicated infrastructure and specialised labour allocation. The evidence for Bronze Age agricultural intensification extends beyond crop cultivation to encompass systematic landscape modification that maximise productive potential. The construction of drainage systems in low-lying areas enabled cultivation of previously waterlogged soils, expanding the total area available for agriculture. Archaeological surveys in Jutland have identified Bronze Age drainage ditches that channeled water from marshy areas into constructed ponds and channels, creating extensive new agricultural lands. The terracing systems constructed on hill slopes throughout southern Scandinavia demonstrate Bronze Age understanding of erosion control and water management. These terraces, built with stone retaining walls and earth fill, created level planting surfaces that prevented soil loss while maximising solar exposure. The construction of agricultural terraces required substantial labour investments and community coordination, indicating that Bronze Age societies could mobilise large workforces for agricultural improvement projects. The forest clearance activities that accompanied agricultural expansion left distinctive signatures in pollen records throughout Scandinavia. The systematic removal of oak, elm, and other deciduous trees created open landscapes dominated by agricultural crops and pasture grasses. However, Bronze Age communities maintained careful forest management practices that preserved woodlands for fuel, construction materials, and specialised products like hazelnuts and berries. The coppicing systems evident in Bronze Age forest remains demonstrate sophisticated woodland management that maximise sustainable timber production. These techniques involved cutting trees at regular intervals to promote rapid regrowth of straight poles, suitable for construction and tool making. The evidence for selective tree management indicates that Bronze Age communities understood the long-term consequences of deforestation and developed practices that balanced immediate needs with future resource availability. Animal husbandry during the Nordic Bronze Age evolved from simple pastoral systems to complex integrated operations that supported both subsistence needs and specialised production for trade and craft activities. Cattle remained the most important domesticated animals throughout the period, providing meat, milk, leather, and traction power for agricultural operations. The size and conformation of Bronze Age cattle, determined through analysis of skeletal remains, reveal selective breeding programs that produced animals optimized for specific functions. The evidence for cattle breeding specialization includes the development of distinct types suited for draft work versus milk and meat production. The larger cattle bones found at elite settlement sites suggest that high-status communities maintained breeding herds of superior animals that served both practical and prestige functions. The investment in cattle breeding required substantial resources and long-term planning, indicating that Bronze Age communities had developed sophisticated animal management systems. Sheep husbandry expanded significantly during the Bronze Age, driven by increasing demand for wool for textile production and trade. The analysis of sheep bones from Bronze Age sites reveals animals that were considerably larger than their Neolithic predecessors, indicating selective breeding for improved wool production. The development of specialised wool sheep required careful management of breeding programs and grazing systems that maximise fibre quality while maintaining herd health. The seasonal movement of sheep flocks between summer and winter pastures created transhumance systems that utilised diverse ecological zones throughout Scandinavia. Archaeological evidence from high-altitude sites in Norway and Sweden reveals temporary shelters and processing facilities used during summer grazing periods. These seasonal movements required coordination between different communities and established usage rights that prevented conflicts over grazing territories. Pig husbandry provided efficient conversion of forest resources and agricultural waste into high-quality protein. Bronze Age pigs were typically smaller than modern breeds, but showed evidence for systematic management that included controlled breeding and seasonal feeding programs. The integration of pig raising with forest management created sustainable systems that utilised acorn crops and other forest products while providing valuable meat and leather. The horse breeding that began during the Bronze Age represented a significant innovation that enhanced both transportation capabilities and military effectiveness. The horses depicted in Bronze Age rock art and recovered from archaeological contexts were considerably smaller than modern breeds, typically standing 13 hands high. However, these animals were well suited for the riding and driving requirements of Bronze Age society, providing mobility that enhanced trade, communication, and warfare capabilities. The settlement patterns that emerged during the agricultural revolution reflect both practical considerations related to farming efficiency and social factors including defence, trade access, and status display. The longhouse architecture that became standard throughout the Nordic Bronze Age created flexible living spaces that accommodated extended families while providing storage and workshop areas for agricultural and craft activities. The Bronze Age longhouses excavated at sites like Bjerre and Hemmed in Denmark typically measured 25 metres in length and 8 metres in width, creating substantial interior spaces divided into multiple functional areas. The construction techniques involved timber frame systems with wattle and daub wall infill, creating structures that were both durable and adaptable to changing family needs. The roof systems, supported by rows of interior posts, could accommodate various covering materials including thatch, turf or wooden shingles. The interior organisation of Bronze Age longhouses reveals sophisticated understanding of space utilisation and environmental control. The typical layout included a central hearth area for cooking and heating, sleeping areas along the side walls, and storage spaces in the gable ends. Workshop areas for craft activities occupied specific zones within the houses, often near doorways to provide adequate lighting and ventilation for detailed work. The evidence for specialised activity areas within longhouses includes concentrations of bronze-working debris, textile production tools, and food processing equipment that indicate household-level craft production. The integration of craft activities with domestic functions demonstrates that Bronze Age families maintained diverse economic strategies that combined agricultural production with specialised manufacturing for local and regional markets. Village organisation during the Bronze Age involved clusters of longhouses arranged according to principles that balance practical considerations with social relationships. The settlements typically contained 15 individual houses arranged around open areas used for communal activities and animal management. The spacing between houses provided fire protection while maintaining social cohesion through shared workspaces and ceremonial areas. The defensive considerations evident in Bronze Age settlement planning include the selection of naturally protected locations and the construction of artificial fortifications where necessary. Many settlements occupied hilltop positions or peninsula sites that provided natural defence advantages while maintaining access to agricultural lands and transportation routes. The investment in defensive features indicates that Bronze Age communities faced regular threats that required coordinated protective measures. The palisade systems constructed around Bronze Age settlements demonstrate sophisticated understanding of defensive architecture and community coordination. These fortifications typically consisted of wooden posts set in deep trenches and reinforced with earth ramparts and stone foundations. The gates and entrances incorporated complex designs that channeled attackers through narrow passages where defenders could concentrate their fire. Territorial boundaries during the Bronze Age became increasingly formalised through the construction of permanent markers and the establishment of recognised usage rights for specific resources. The stone walls and earthen banks that defined field systems also served to mark territorial claims and prevent disputes over land ownership. The investment in boundary construction indicates that Bronze Age communities had developed legal and social systems for resolving territorial conflicts. The evidence for territorial organisation includes the distribution of elite burial sites and specialised craft production centres that suggest hierarchical control systems extending across substantial geographic areas. The spacing between major Bronze Age centres corresponds to distances that could be effectively controlled by individual chieftain groups, indicating territorial divisions that may have persisted for centuries. The environmental adaptations that enabled Bronze Age agricultural expansion required sophisticated understanding of climatic patterns and ecological relationships. The subboreal period, characterised by relatively warm and dry conditions, provided favourable circumstances for agricultural intensification, but also created challenges including increased fire risk and water scarcity during drought periods. The water management systems constructed during the Bronze Age demonstrate community responses to climatic variability and seasonal water availability. The construction of wells, ponds and irrigation channels provided reliable water sources for both human consumption and agricultural production. The engineering skills required for these projects indicate that Bronze Age communities had developed sophisticated understanding of hydrology and construction techniques. The evidence for Bronze Age responses to climatic fluctuations includes modifications to agricultural practices and settlement patterns that accommodated changing environmental conditions. The adoption of drought-resistant crop varieties and the development of water storage facilities demonstrate adaptive strategies that enabled communities to maintain productivity despite climatic stress. The population growth that accompanied agricultural intensification created pressures for territorial expansion and the colonisation of previously marginal lands. The establishment of Bronze Age settlements in upland areas and coastal regions that had been sparsely occupied during earlier periods indicates systematic expansion supported by improved agricultural techniques and bronze technology. The colonization of marginal environments required specialized adaptations that maximized the productive potential of challenging landscapes. The development of terraced agriculture on steep slopes and the construction of drainage systems in wetland areas enabled Bronze Age communities to utilize diverse ecological zones for agricultural production. The role of bronze tools in enabling agricultural expansion cannot be overstated. Bronze axes provided efficient forest clearance capabilities that enabled rapid expansion of cultivated areas. Bronze sickles and other harvesting tools increased agricultural efficiency and enabled the processing of larger crop yields. Bronze plowshares and other cultivation implements enhanced soil preparation and enabled intensive farming techniques that maximize productivity. The distribution of bronze agricultural tools reveals patterns of technological diffusion and economic relationships that connected Bronze Age communities across wide geographic areas. The standardization of tool types and manufacturing techniques indicates coordinated production systems that supplied agricultural implements to farming communities throughout the Nordic cultural zone. The social implications of agricultural intensification extended beyond simple subsistence improvements to encompass fundamental changes in community organization and social relationships. The increased productivity enabled by Bronze Age farming techniques supported larger populations and greater economic specialization, creating conditions for the complex social hierarchies and cultural achievements that characterized the mature Bronze Age civilization. The agricultural innovations and territorial expansions that characterized the preceding centuries created the foundation for what represents the absolute pinnacle of Nordic Bronze Age achievement. Between 1500 and 1100 BC, corresponding to periods 2 through 4 of Oscar Montelius's chronological framework, Scandinavian societies reached unprecedented levels of technological sophistication, artistic excellence, and cultural unity that would not be equalled again until the Viking Age. This golden age witnessed the transformation of regional chieftains into powerful rulers commanding extensive territories, the establishment of trade networks spanning from the Atlantic shores of Ireland to the steppes beyond the Black Sea, and the creation of artistic masterpieces that rival the finest metalwork produced anywhere in Bronze Age Europe. The bronze production techniques that emerged during period 2, approximately 1500 to 1300 BC, demonstrated mastery of metallurgical processes that surpassed contemporary achievements in most other European regions. Nordic smiths had developed sophisticated understanding of alloy composition that enabled them to produce bronze objects with precisely controlled properties suited for specific functions. Weapons required harder alloys with higher tin content, typically ranging from 10 to 13%, while decorative objects used softer bronze with 6 to 8% tin that could be more easily worked into complex shapes. This level of metallurgical control required extensive experimentation and systematic knowledge transfer between workshops across the Nordic cultural zone. The lost wax casting techniques perfected during this period enabled the production of objects with unprecedented complexity and artistic refinement. The bronze lure horns discovered at Brudevalter in Denmark demonstrate the extraordinary technical capabilities achieved by period 3 craftsmen around 1200 BC. These massive instruments, measuring 1.8 meters in length and weighing nearly 7 kilograms each, required precise acoustic calculations to ensure proper tonal qualities across their full range. The casting process involved creating detailed wax models with internal sound chambers calculated to produce specific harmonic relationships. The bronze surface displays decorative patterns so intricate that individual elements measure less than 1 millimeter in width, requiring magnification to appreciate their full detail. The standardization of bronze object types across the entire Nordic region during this period reveals sophisticated systems of technological transfer and quality control that maintained consistent standards despite production in dozens of separate workshops. The Type 3 swords that appeared around 1300 BC display virtually identical proportions, metallurgical composition, and decorative schemes whether produced in Jutland, Scania or the Norwegian fjords. This consistency required coordinated training programs for craftsmen and standardized measurement systems that ensured interchangeability of components and uniform quality standards. The sheet metal working techniques developed during Period 3 enabled Nordic craftsmen to create large decorative objects that would have required prohibitive quantities of bronze if produced through solid casting. The bronze cauldrons from this period, with capacities exceeding 30 litres, demonstrate mastery of complex forming techniques that created vessels with walls less than 2 millimeters thick. The largest cauldrons required careful coordination between multiple craftsmen working simultaneously to shape the bronze sheets before the metal cooled and became unworkable. The decorative schemes applied to these vessels, featuring intricate repousse work and engraved details, transformed functional objects into artistic masterpieces suitable for the most prestigious ceremonial contexts. The international trade networks that supported this technological flowering extended across unprecedented geographic ranges, connecting Nordic communities to resource sources and markets throughout Europe and beyond. Amber from the Baltic shores reached Mycenaean Greece, where it appears in the shaft graves at Mycenae dating to the 16th and 15th centuries BC. Chemical analysis of amber beads found in the tomb of Clytemnestra confirms their Baltic origin, indicating trade connections spanning over 2,000 kilometres and involving multiple intermediary exchanges across Central and Southeastern Europe. The complexity of these trade networks required sophisticated organisational systems that coordinated production, transportation, and exchange across vast distances. The standardised weight systems evident in Bronze Age hoards suggest that Nordic communities had adopted measurement standards compatible with those used throughout Europe, enabling accurate valuation and exchange of goods in distant markets. Bronze ingots from Period 3 context display consistent weight ratios that correspond to measurement systems used in Central Europe and the Mediterranean, indicating integration into international commercial networks. The evidence for direct maritime connections between Scandinavia and distant regions includes the discovery of Nordic bronze objects in contexts far from their production centres. The bronze sword found at Riegsee in Bavaria displays characteristic Nordic construction techniques and decorative motifs despite being discovered over 1,000 kilometres from the nearest Nordic workshop. Similarly, Central European bronze types appear in Scandinavian contexts, indicating bidirectional exchange relationships rather than simple one-way export of Nordic products. The wealth accumulated through these extensive trade networks enabled the construction of monumental burial complexes that represent some of the most impressive prehistoric monuments in Northern Europe. The great barrows constructed during periods 2 and 3 required enormous labour investments and demonstrate the ability of elite families to command resources on an unprecedented scale. The Boromishoj complex in central Jutland, built around 1400 BC, consists of 3 massive mounds with a combined volume exceeding 15,000 cubic metres of earth and stone. The construction of these monuments required coordination of hundreds of workers over multiple building seasons, indicating social organisation capabilities that approached those of early state societies. The preservation conditions within these monumental barrows have provided extraordinary insights into the material culture and burial practices of the Bronze Age elite. The oak coffin burials at Boromishoj contained remarkably preserved organic materials, including complete sets of woolen clothing, leather accessories, and wooden objects that rarely survive in archaeological contexts. The primary burial contained a man aged 50, 60 years at death, dressed in a woolen tunic with bronze buttons, leather shoes with bronze ornaments, and a distinctive woolen cap with a bronze-mounted leather chin strap. The bronze sword accompanying this burial measured 84 centimetres in total length and displayed exceptional craftsmanship with spiral decorations on the hilt and a blade polished to mirror brightness. The secondary burial within the same mound contained the remains of a woman aged 35, 40 years. accompanied by grave goods that demonstrate the high status achieved by elite women during the Golden Age. Her bronze belt plate, measuring 23 centimeters in diameter, featured intricate spiral decorations created through a combination of casting and repousse techniques. The belt itself incorporated multiple bronze elements, including hanging ornaments, rings, and decorative studs that created a complex assemblage weighing over 2 kilograms. The preservation of her woolen dress revealed sophisticated textile production techniques, including complex weaving patterns and the integration of bronze ornaments during fabric construction. The stone cist burials that appeared alongside barrow interments during Period 3 represent another form of elite burial practice that required substantial labour investments and demonstrated family wealth. These stone-lined graves, constructed from carefully fitted megalithic slabs, created permanent burial chambers that could accommodate multiple interments over extended periods. The Kivik cist in Skanna, dating to approximately 1200 BC, contains carved stone panels depicting ships, warriors, and ceremonial scenes that provide detailed insights into Bronze Age religious beliefs and social practices. The artistic programs decorating the Kivik cist reveal sophisticated narrative compositions that combine multiple symbolic elements into coherent ceremonial scenes. The ship processions carved on the interior walls show vessels with crews engaged in apparent ritual activities, including the carrying of ceremonial axes and the performance of ritual gestures. The warrior scenes depict armed figures with characteristic Bronze Age weapons and equipment, including the distinctive horned helmets that appear in rock art throughout Scandinavia during this period. The cultural unity that characterized the Nordic Bronze Age Golden Age extended beyond simple technological standardization to encompass shared artistic traditions, religious symbols, and social practices that created a coherent cultural identity across vast geographic territories. The spiral motifs that dominated decorative schemes during periods 2, 4 appear with remarkable consistency from Norway to northern Germany, indicating shared symbolic systems that transcended local political boundaries. These decorative elements served both aesthetic and functional purposes, strengthening thin bronze sheets while providing textural grip surfaces on weapons and tools. The religious symbolism evident in Golden Age art reveals sophisticated cosmological beliefs that integrated astronomical observation with maritime imagery and warrior ideology. The sun symbols that appear throughout Nordic Bronze Age art became increasingly elaborate during this period, evolving from simple circular designs to complex compositions featuring radiating elements and spiral details that suggest advanced understanding of solar phenomena. The integration of these symbols with ship imagery indicates that Bronze Age communities viewed maritime activities as having cosmic significance, possibly representing ritual journeys between earthly and divine realms. The standardization of religious practices across the Nordic cultural zone required sophisticated communication networks that transmitted ceremonial knowledge and ritual procedures between communities separated by hundreds of kilometers. The consistency of votive deposit practices, where bronze objects were systematically destroyed and deposited in water bodies, indicates shared religious beliefs that governed ritual behaviour throughout the region. The types of objects selected for these deposits, particularly high-quality weapons and ceremonial items, suggests standardized concepts of appropriate offerings to supernatural powers. The evidence for specialized religious practitioners during the Golden Age includes the discovery of distinctive ritual objects and burial contexts that suggest professional ceremonial roles. The bronze razors decorated with complex symbolic programs may have served ritual as well as practical functions, with their elaborate decorative schemes indicating specialized religious knowledge. The consistent quality and symbolic content of these objects across wide geographic areas suggests standardized training and shared religious traditions among Bronze Age ritual specialists. The technological innovations that emerged during Period 4, approximately 1100–900 BC, included the development of ironworking techniques that would eventually transform Nordic society. However, during the late Golden Age, iron remained a prestige material used primarily for small ornamental objects and specialised tools. The continued dominance of bronze technology during this period demonstrates the sophisticated supply chains and manufacturing systems that Nordic communities had developed to support their bronze-based economy. The late Golden Age witnessed the production of some of the finest bronze objects ever created in prehistoric Europe. The Gundestrup cauldron, though dating to the later Iron Age, represents the culmination of decorative traditions that began during the Bronze Age Golden Age. The technical sophistication required to create such complex repoussé work developed gradually through centuries of experimentation and refinement during periods 2, 4. The defensive systems that emerged during the later Golden Age reflect increasing territorial competition and the need to protect accumulated wealth from external threats. The hill forts constructed during period 4 demonstrate sophisticated understanding of military engineering and community defence. These fortifications typically incorporated natural topographic advantages with artificial earthworks and stone walls that created formidable defensive positions capable of withstanding prolonged sieges. The evidence for organised warfare during the Golden Age includes the discovery of weapons caches and battlefield deposits that suggest large-scale military conflicts. The Nebel hoard from Schleswig-Holstein contained over 3,000 bronze objects, including hundreds of weapons that may represent the equipment of an entire army. The systematic destruction of these weapons before deposition indicates ritual practices associated with warfare and victory celebrations. The population growth that characterised the Golden Age created pressures for territorial expansion and the establishment of new settlements in previously marginal areas. The colonisation of upland regions and coastal islands during periods 3, 4 demonstrates the confidence and organisational capabilities of Bronze Age communities. These new settlements required substantial initial investments in land clearance, agricultural development, and defensive preparations that could only be undertaken by prosperous and well-organised societies. The artistic achievements of the Golden Age extended beyond metalworking to encompass sophisticated traditions of rock art, textile production, and wooden sculpture. The rock art complexes at Tanum and other Scandinavian sites reached their greatest elaboration during this period, with individual panels containing dozens of figures arranged in complex narrative compositions. The technical skill required to create these carvings, combined with their sophisticated symbolic content, demonstrates the high level of artistic achievement reached by Nordic Bronze Age society. The international recognition of Nordic artistic achievements during the Golden Age is evident in the adoption of Scandinavian decorative motifs by craftsmen in other regions of Europe. The spiral patterns and geometric designs characteristic of Nordic bronze work appear on objects produced in Central Europe and the British Isles, indicating that Scandinavian artistic traditions had achieved sufficient prestige to influence contemporary developments throughout the continent. The sophisticated bronze-working traditions and monumental burial practices that defined the Golden Age of Nordic Bronze Age civilization provide only partial glimpses into the complex social fabric that sustained these remarkable achievements. The daily existence of Bronze Age communities, their family structures, gender roles, and domestic practices emerge most clearly through careful analysis of burial contexts, preserved organic materials, and settlement archaeology that reveals the intimate details of how people actually lived, worked, and organised their households during this transformative period. The exceptional preservation conditions found in certain Bronze Age burials have yielded unprecedented insights into the lives of women during this period, with the famous Egtved girl burial standing as perhaps the most remarkable example of how individual life stories can illuminate broader social patterns. Discovered in 1921 near Egtved in central Jutland, this burial dates to approximately 1370 BC and contained the remarkably preserved remains of a young woman aged 16, 18 years at death. The waterlogged conditions within her oak coffin created an anaerobic environment that preserved not only her skeletal remains, but also her complete outfit, revealing details of Bronze Age female dress and ornamentation that would otherwise remain completely unknown. The Egtved girl wore a short woolen tunic that ended just below her hips, constructed from fine brown wool woven in a plain tabby weave that required considerable skill to produce. The tunic featured long sleeves and was secured at the waist with a large bronze belt disc measuring 23 centimetres in diameter and weighing nearly half a kilogram. This belt plate displayed intricate spiral decorations created through repoussé techniques, with raised patterns that caught light and created visual emphasis on the wearer's midsection. The bronze disc was attached to a woven woolen cord that wrapped multiple times around her waist, creating a distinctive belt system that appears to have been characteristic of high-status women during this period. Below the tunic, the Egtved girl wore a short woolen skirt that reached to mid-thigh, constructed from the same fine brown wool as her upper garment. The skirt was pleated and gathered at the waist, creating a full silhouette that would have moved gracefully during walking or dancing. Her legs were covered by woolen leg wrappings that extended from ankle to knee, secured with leather ties and creating a practical covering suitable for the cooler Scandinavian climate. On her feet she wore soft leather shoes with bronze studs that served both decorative and functional purposes, protecting the leather from wear while displaying the metalworking skills available to her family. The preservation of the Egtved girl's hair reveals sophisticated grooming practices that required considerable time and skill to achieve. Her long blonde hair was arranged in an elaborate coiffure with intricate braiding and the incorporation of a hairnet constructed from horsehair threads. The hairnet itself represents a remarkable technical achievement, with individual threads measuring less than 0.1 millimeters in diameter and woven into a complex mesh pattern that held the hair arrangement securely in place. The construction of such hairnets required specialized skills and tools, suggesting that Bronze Age women had developed sophisticated traditions of personal grooming and hair arrangement. Chemical analysis of the Egtved girl's hair has provided remarkable insights into her geographic origins and mobility patterns during her lifetime. Strontium isotope analysis indicates that she spent her childhood in a region with different geological characteristics than central Jutland, most likely in the Black Forest region of southwestern Germany. This evidence suggests that she travelled over 800 kilometres from her birthplace to her final burial location, indicating mobility patterns that connected Bronze Age communities across vast distances. The implications of this long-distance movement include the possibility of marriage alliances between elite families separated by hundreds of kilometres, creating political and economic connections that transcended local territorial boundaries. The grave goods accompanying the Egtved girl reveal the material culture associated with high-status women during the Bronze Age Golden Age. In addition to her elaborate bronze belt disc, she was buried with bronze arm rings that displayed the same high-quality craftsmanship found in male elite burials. These arm rings were constructed from bronze wire twisted into complex patterns and finished with decorative terminals that prevented the ornaments from sliding off the wearer's arms. The consistent quality of these bronze objects indicates that female elites had access to the same skilled craftsmen and high-grade materials as their male counterparts. A small bronze awl found in the burial provides evidence for the Egtved girl's involvement in craft production activities. The awl, measuring 8.5 centimeters in length, shows wear patterns consistent with regular use in leatherworking and textile production. The presence of this functional tool alongside elaborate ornaments suggests that even high-status women maintained active roles in craft production, contributing their specialized skills to household economies while also serving as displays of family wealth and status. The floral remains preserved in the Egtved burial provide seasonal dating evidence and insights into Bronze Age ritual practices. The presence of yarrow flowers indicates that the burial took place during summer months, while the inclusion of these specific plants may have carried symbolic significance related to fertility, protection, or other spiritual beliefs. The careful placement of plant materials within the burial suggests deliberate ritual procedures that governed funeral practices for elite women. The Skridstrup burial, discovered in southern Jutland in 1935, provides complementary evidence for female elite culture during the Nordic Bronze Age. Dating to approximately 1300 BC, this burial contained the remains of a woman aged 18, 19 years at death, preserved in conditions similar to those that protected the Egtved girl. The Skridstrup woman wore a distinctive outfit that reveals both similarities and differences in female elite dress across different regions and time periods. The Skridstrup woman's most remarkable feature was her elaborate hairstyle, preserved in extraordinary detail that reveals the sophistication of Bronze Age hair arrangement techniques. Her long blonde hair was fashioned into a complex coiffure featuring a high spiral arrangement secured with a horsehair net and bronze ornaments. The construction of this hairstyle required several hours of work by skilled practitioners and demonstrates the importance placed on personal appearance among Bronze Age elites. The spiral arrangement of her hair mirrors the decorative motifs found on contemporary bronze objects, suggesting that personal grooming practices reflected broader artistic and symbolic traditions. Her clothing consisted of a long woolen tunic that reached to her ankles, constructed from fine wool woven in a complex pattern that created subtle textural variations across the fabric surface. The tunic was secured with bronze fibulae that served both functional and decorative purposes, holding the garment in place while displaying metalworking artistry. The fibulae featured intricate spiral decorations and were constructed using lost wax casting techniques that created precise details impossible to achieve through simple hammering or engraving. The Skridstrup woman wore a distinctive bronze armouring that differed significantly from those found with the Egtved girl, suggesting regional variations in female ornament styles or chronological changes in fashion preferences. This armouring featured a flat band decorated with geometric patterns and was constructed from sheet bronze rather than twisted wire. The different construction technique may indicate specialised craftsmen who serve particular regional markets or elite families with distinctive stylistic preferences. The preservation of organic materials in elite female burials has provided crucial evidence for Bronze Age textile production techniques that would otherwise remain completely unknown. The woolen fabrics found in these burials demonstrate sophisticated weaving technologies that required advanced loom construction and considerable skill in thread preparation. The analysis of fabric structures reveals the use of both tabby and twill weaves, with some examples showing complex pattern variations that created decorative effects through the manipulation of warp and weft threads. The quality of Bronze Age woolen textiles indicates systematic sheep breeding programs that produced animals with superior wool characteristics. The fibres preserved in elite burials are considerably finer than those from wild sheep or primitive domestic breeds, suggesting selective breeding over multiple generations to improve wool quality. The consistent fineness of these fibres across different burial contexts indicates that high-quality wool production had become standardised throughout the Nordic Bronze Age cultural zone. The dyeing techniques used to colour Bronze Age textiles reveal sophisticated understanding of plant chemistry and colour production methods. The brown coloration of fabrics found in the Egtved and Skridstrup burials was achieved through the use of plant-based dyes that created permanent coloration resistant to fading over millennia. Chemical analysis has identified specific plant compounds that were used to achieve different colour effects, including the use of madder root for red tones and woad for blue coloration. The integration of bronze ornaments into textile construction demonstrates coordination between metalworking and textile production specialists. The bronze buttons found on Bronze Age garments were attached during fabric construction rather than added later, requiring careful planning and coordination between weavers and metalworkers. This integration suggests that elite clothing production involved collaborative efforts between different craft specialists working under centralised direction. The evidence for Bronze Age family structures emerges through analysis of burial patterns, settlement organisation, and the distribution of material culture within domestic contexts. The nuclear family appears to have formed the basic social unit throughout the Nordic Bronze Age, with evidence for extended family groups occupying individual longhouse structures. The internal organisation of these dwellings reveals spatial divisions that accommodated different family members while providing areas for specialised activities, including craft production, food preparation, and storage. The longhouse excavations at Bjerre in Jutland have revealed detailed evidence for Bronze Age domestic organisation and family life. The largest structure at this site measured 23 metres in length and 7 metres in width, creating interior space sufficient for an extended family group of 20 individuals. The internal post arrangements created distinct activity areas, including sleeping spaces along the side walls, a central hearth area for cooking and heating, and specialised work areas near the entrances where natural lighting supported craft activities. The distribution of artefacts within the Bjerre Longhouse reveals gender-specific activity areas that suggest systematic division of labour within Bronze Age households. Textile production tools, including loom weights, spindle whorls, and bronze needles, concentrated in specific areas of the house that received optimal natural lighting during daylight hours. Bronze-working debris and metal-working tools appeared in different areas, typically closer to entrances where ventilation could remove harmful fumes, and where the noise of hammering would not disturb sleeping areas. The evidence for children within Bronze Age households includes the discovery of miniature bronze objects that may have served as toys or training implements for young craft workers. These miniature axes, swords, and ornaments display the same construction techniques and decorative motifs found on full-sized adult objects, suggesting that children were introduced to craft traditions at early ages through play activities that prepared them for adult roles. The burial evidence for Bronze Age children reveals systematic care and investment in young family members, with some juvenile burials containing substantial grave goods that indicate inherited rather than achieved status. The child burial from Borumeshoj contained miniature bronze objects, including a small dagger and ornamental fittings that mirror the equipment found in adult elite burials. The investment in elaborate burial treatment for children suggests that Bronze Age families viewed their offspring as inheritors of family status and wealth, rather than simply economic burdens. The kinship systems that governed Bronze Age society appear to have emphasised patrilineal descent, while recognising important roles for women in maintaining family alliances and economic relationships. The evidence for long-distance marriage patterns, exemplified by the Edtivt girls' geographic origins, suggests that elite families arranged marriages across substantial distances to create political and economic alliances. These marriage patterns would have created extensive kinship networks that connected communities throughout the Nordic cultural zone. The inheritance patterns evident in Bronze Age burial practices reveal systematic transfer of wealth and status between generations. The consistency of grave good types within family burial groups suggests that specific objects, particularly weapons and ornaments, passed from parents to children as markers of family identity and social position. The appearance of similar bronze object types in burials separated by several generations indicates that some items served as family heirlooms that maintained their significance across extended periods. Daily life reconstruction through analysis of domestic artifacts reveals the sophisticated material culture that supported Bronze Age households. The bronze tools found in settlement contexts include specialised implements for food preparation, textile production, leatherworking, and agricultural activities that demonstrate the diverse skills required for household maintenance. The quality and variety of these tools indicate that Bronze Age families had access to efficient implements that enhance productivity and quality of life. Food preparation activities within Bronze Age households involve sophisticated techniques for processing agricultural products and preparing meals for extended family groups. The large bronze cauldrons found in elite contexts could accommodate substantial quantities of food, suggesting communal dining practices that reinforced family solidarity and social hierarchies. The smaller bronze vessels used for individual servings displayed decorative schemes that transformed everyday dining into opportunities for status display. The evidence for Bronze Age cooking techniques includes specialized bronze implements for roasting, boiling and baking that enabled diverse food preparation methods. Bronze spits and roasting forks allowed controlled cooking of meat over open fires, while bronze ladles and serving implements facilitated the distribution of prepared foods. The sophistication of these cooking implements indicates that Bronze Age communities placed considerable importance on food quality and presentation. The storage systems used within Bronze Age households reveal careful planning for seasonal food security and resource management. Large ceramic vessels provided bulk storage for grain and other agricultural products, while smaller bronze containers held valuable commodities including imported goods and specialized craft materials. The organization of storage areas within longhouses demonstrates systematic inventory management that ensured adequate supplies during winter months and periods of resource scarcity. The evidence for Bronze Age hygiene and personal care practices includes specialized bronze implements for grooming and body maintenance. The bronze razors found in both male and female burials display sophisticated manufacturing techniques that created sharp, durable cutting edges suitable for hair removal and personal grooming. The decorative schemes applied to these razors transformed functional tools into artistic objects that reflected the status and aesthetic preferences of their owners. The bronze tweezers found in many Bronze Age contexts provided precision implements for personal grooming and craft activities. These tools required careful manufacturing to create properly aligned gripping surfaces and demonstrate the attention to detail that characterized Bronze Age metalworking. The consistent quality of tweezers across different regions indicates standardized production methods that maintained functional effectiveness while incorporating decorative elements. The household technologies that supported Bronze Age daily life included sophisticated systems for lighting, heating, and environmental control within domestic structures. Bronze lamps provided controlled illumination for evening activities, while carefully designed hearth systems maximized heating efficiency while minimizing smoke production. The ventilation arrangements within longhouses demonstrate understanding of air circulation principles that maintained comfortable interior environments despite the challenges of Northern European climate conditions. The evidence for Bronze Age entertainment and leisure activities includes gaming pieces, musical instruments, and decorative objects that suggest sophisticated cultural traditions beyond simple subsistence activities. Bronze gaming pieces found in settlement contexts indicate organised recreational activities that may have served social and educational functions within family groups. The standardisation of gaming piece designs across different sites suggests shared recreational traditions that connected Bronze Age communities through common cultural practices. The musical traditions evident in Bronze Age society include the remarkable lure horns that represent some of the finest achievements of prehistoric European metalworking. These massive instruments required exceptional technical skill to produce and considerable physical strength to operate, suggesting that musical performance had become a specialised activity requiring formal training. The acoustic properties of lures indicate that they were designed for outdoor ceremonial performances that could be heard over considerable distances. The integration of artistic traditions into daily life appears throughout Bronze Age material culture, with decorative motifs applied to functional objects ranging from cooking vessels to agricultural tools. The consistency of these decorative schemes across different object categories indicates that Bronze Age communities maintained coherent aesthetic traditions that unified diverse aspects of material culture. The spiral motifs that dominated Bronze Age art appear on objects as varied as sword hilts, belt plates, and ceramic vessels, creating visual connections between different spheres of activity. The evidence for Bronze Age trade and exchange at the household level includes exotic materials and finished goods that reached even modest settlements through established distribution networks. Amber beads and bronze ornaments appear in contexts that suggest widespread access to trade goods, though the quality and quantity of such items clearly reflected social hierarchies and economic capabilities. The presence of standardized bronze object types in diverse contexts indicates that trade networks operated at multiple social levels, connecting elite centres with smaller communities throughout the Nordic cultural zone. The sophisticated trade networks and cultural achievements that had sustained Nordic Bronze Age civilization for over half a millennium began to show signs of severe strain around 1100 BC. What had once been reliable supply chains connecting Scandinavia to distant sources of copper and tin started experiencing systematic disruptions that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of Northern European development. This crisis manifested not as a sudden catastrophic collapse, but as a gradual deterioration of the economic and social systems that had enabled the remarkable achievements of the preceding Golden Age. The climatic deterioration that marked the transition from the subboreal to the subatlantic period created environmental pressures that affected communities throughout Northern Europe. Temperature records derived from bog deposits and tree ring analyses reveal a significant cooling trend beginning around 1200 BC, with average temperatures dropping by 2 degrees Celsius compared to the warmer conditions of the preceding centuries. This cooling was accompanied by increased precipitation and greater climatic variability, creating growing seasons that became shorter and less predictable than those that had supported the agricultural expansion of the Golden Age. The impact of these climatic changes on Bronze Age agricultural systems was severe and cumulative. The shortened growing seasons reduced crop yields throughout Scandinavia, while increased rainfall created waterlogging problems in low-lying areas that had previously been productive agricultural lands. Archaeological evidence from sites like Bjerre and Sarup reveals the abandonment of field systems that had been continuously cultivated for centuries, with former agricultural areas reverting to wetland conditions that made farming impossible with Bronze Age technology. The pollen records from this period document systematic forest regeneration in areas that had been cleared for agriculture during the preceding centuries. Oak, elm, and other deciduous trees began recolonizing abandoned fields, creating dense secondary forests that required enormous labor investments to clear again. The expansion of forest cover reduced the amount of land available for grazing, forcing communities to reduce their livestock herds and limiting the availability of animal products that had formed crucial components of Bronze Age diets. The agricultural stress created by climatic deterioration was compounded by soil exhaustion in areas that had supported intensive cultivation during the Golden Age. The Bronze Age farming systems, despite their sophistication, had gradually depleted soil nutrients through centuries of continuous cropping. The manuring practices that had initially maintained soil fertility became insufficient to counteract the cumulative effects of nutrient depletion, particularly in light soils that were vulnerable to leaching during periods of increased rainfall. Archaeological evidence from abandoned Bronze Age settlements reveals the systematic depletion of local forest resources that had supported communities for generations. The charcoal remains from later Bronze Age contexts show increasing use of smaller branches and less desirable wood species, indicating that preferred fuel sources had become scarce. The construction timber available to communities also declined in quality, with later Bronze Age buildings showing the use of smaller posts and less substantial frameworks than those constructed during the Golden Age. The bronze production crisis that emerged during this period reflected both supply chain disruptions and reduced demand from communities struggling with agricultural and environmental challenges. The copper sources in Central Europe that had supplied Nordic workshops for centuries began experiencing their own production difficulties as local communities faced similar climatic and social pressures. The tin sources in Cornwall and Brittany became increasingly difficult to access as political instability in Western Europe disrupted established trade routes. Chemical analysis of bronze objects from the crisis period reveals significant changes in alloy composition that reflect the growing scarcity of raw materials. The tin content of bronze objects dropped significantly, with many items containing only 6% tin compared to the 12% that had been standard during the Golden Age. This reduction in tin content created bronze alloys that were softer and less durable than their predecessors, limiting their effectiveness for tools and weapons while reducing their prestige value as status symbols. The quality of bronze-working craftsmanship also declined markedly during this period, as workshops struggled to maintain production standards with inferior raw materials and reduced economic support from elite patrons. The intricate decorative schemes that had characterised Golden Age metalwork gave way to simpler designs that required less skilled labour and fewer raw materials to produce. The lost wax casting techniques that had enabled the creation of complex objects like lure horns became economically unfeasible, forcing craftsmen to rely on simpler production methods that yielded less sophisticated results. Archaeological evidence from bronze-working sites reveals the systematic closure of workshops that had operated continuously for centuries. The Thy Workshop complex in Denmark, which had been one of the most productive bronze-working centres in Scandinavia, shows clear signs of abandonment around 1000 BC. The final occupation layers contain large quantities of bronze scrap and unfinished objects, suggesting that production ceased abruptly when raw materials or economic support became unavailable. The recycling of bronze objects became increasingly important as new metal supplies dwindled. Hoards from the crisis period contain large quantities of broken and damaged bronze items that were clearly being collected for remelting rather than ritual deposition. The systematic breaking of bronze objects before hoarding indicates that these deposits represented emergency reserves of raw material, rather than the votive offerings that had characterised earlier periods. The social upheaval that accompanied the bronze production crisis manifested in dramatic changes to settlement patterns and defensive arrangements throughout Scandinavia. The open settlements that had characterised the Golden Age gave way to fortified positions that emphasised defence over convenience or agricultural efficiency. These new settlement types reflected a fundamental shift in priorities as communities increasingly focused on protection from external threats, rather than maximising economic productivity. The hill forts that emerged during this period demonstrate sophisticated understanding of defensive architecture and community protection strategies. The Torslov Hill Fort in Jutland, constructed around 1000 BC, occupied a naturally defensible position that was enhanced with massive earthwork fortifications. The defensive walls, constructed from earth and stone with timber reinforcements, created barriers over 4 metres high that surrounded the entire settlement. The entrance arrangements incorporated complex gate systems that channeled attackers through narrow passages where defenders could concentrate their resistance. Archaeological excavations within these hill forts reveal cramped living conditions that contrast sharply with the spacious longhouses of earlier periods. The buildings within Torslev were smaller and more densely packed than their predecessors, suggesting that defensive considerations had taken precedence over comfort or convenience. The limited space available within the fortifications forced communities to abandon many of the craft activities that had characterised earlier settlements, concentrating instead on essential activities required for survival. The evidence for increased warfare during this period includes weapon deposits and battlefield remains that suggest large-scale conflicts became more common and more destructive than during the Golden Age. The Nibel weapon deposit from Schleswig-Holstein, dating to approximately 900 BC, contained over 200 bronze weapons that showed clear evidence of combat damage. Many of the swords and spears displayed nicks, dents and breaks that indicated use in actual fighting rather than ceremonial display. The types of weapons found in crisis period deposits reveal changes in military technology and tactics that reflected the altered strategic environment. Bronze weapons became smaller and lighter than their Golden Age predecessors, possibly reflecting the reduced availability of raw materials, but also suggesting changes in fighting techniques that emphasised mobility over individual strength. The appearance of iron weapons in some contexts indicates that communities were beginning to experiment with alternative technologies as bronze became increasingly scarce. The demographic changes that occurred during the crisis period included significant population movements that disrupted established territorial boundaries and social relationships. Archaeological evidence suggests that some communities abandoned their traditional territories entirely, migrating to regions that offered better defensive positions or more reliable resource access. The abandonment of previously prosperous settlements created vacant territories that became contested zones between different groups seeking new lands. The population movements during this period were not random migrations, but appear to have followed established routes and targeted specific destinations that offered strategic advantages. Coastal communities often moved inland to positions that were less vulnerable to seaborne attacks, while inland groups sometimes relocated to coastal areas where maritime resources could supplement declining agricultural production. These movements created complex patterns of territorial reorganization that disrupted the stable political boundaries that had characterized the Golden Age. The burial practices that emerged during the crisis period reflected the profound social and economic changes affecting Bronze Age communities. The elaborate barrow burials that had characterized elite funerary practices during the Golden Age became increasingly rare, replaced by simpler interment practices that required fewer resources and less community labour. This transformation reflected both the reduced wealth available for funerary display and changes in social organisation that diminished the authority of traditional elite groups. The transition from inhumation to cremation burial practices accelerated significantly during this period, fundamentally altering the archaeological record and indicating major changes in religious beliefs and social practices. Cremation burials required fewer grave goods and less elaborate tomb construction than inhumation practices, making them more economically feasible for communities facing resource constraints. The adoption of cremation also reflected changing concepts of death and afterlife that emphasized spiritual transformation rather than bodily preservation. The urnfields that became characteristic of late Bronze Age burial practices created new forms of cemetery organisation that differed dramatically from the monumental barrow complexes of earlier periods. These cemeteries consisted of numerous small cremation burials, arranged in organised patterns that emphasise community membership rather than individual status distinctions. The standardisation of burial practices within urnfields suggests the development of more egalitarian social structures that replace the hierarchical systems of the Golden Age. The grave goods accompanying crisis period burials show dramatic reductions in both quantity and quality compared to earlier practices. Bronze objects became rare in burial contexts, with many graves containing only ceramic vessels and simple personal ornaments. The weapons that had been essential components of elite male burials during the Golden Age virtually disappeared from funerary contexts, suggesting that bronze weapons had become too valuable for burial, or that warrior status had lost its social significance. The ceramic vessels that replaced bronze grave goods in crisis period burials display distinctive stylistic characteristics that reflect changing cultural preferences and production capabilities. These vessels were typically smaller and simpler than their predecessors, with decorative schemes that relied on incised patterns rather than the complex surface treatments that had characterized earlier pottery. The standardization of ceramic forms across wide geographic areas suggests the development of new cultural traditions that unified communities facing similar challenges. The disruption of long-distance trade networks forced Bronze Age communities to develop alternative economic strategies that relied more heavily on local resources and regional exchange relationships. The amber trade that had been central to Nordic Bronze Age prosperity continued during the crisis period, but operated through different organisational systems that adapted to changing political and economic conditions. Local amber working became more important as communities sought to maximise the value of their primary export commodity. The search for alternative metal sources led to increased exploitation of bog iron deposits that had been largely ignored during the bronze-dominated Golden Age. Iron production technology, which had been developing slowly throughout Europe during the later Bronze Age, began to receive serious attention from Nordic communities as bronze supplies became unreliable. The earliest iron objects found in Scandinavian contexts date to this crisis period and represent experimental attempts to develop alternative metallurgical technologies. The ironworking techniques that emerged during this period were initially crude and produced objects of inferior quality compared to bronze implements. Early iron tools were often brittle and prone to corrosion, limiting their effectiveness for many applications. However, the local availability of iron ore in bog deposits throughout Scandinavia made iron production economically attractive despite its technological limitations. Communities could produce iron tools without relying on long-distance trade networks that had become unreliable. The technological innovation that characterized the crisis period extended beyond metallurgy to encompass new approaches to agriculture, craft production, and resource management. Communities developed more intensive cultivation techniques that maximized yields from smaller areas of land, compensating for the loss of agricultural territory to climatic deterioration. These innovations included improved ploughing techniques, more sophisticated crop rotation systems, and better integration of animal husbandry with plant cultivation. The craft production systems that emerged during the crisis period emphasized functionality over artistic elaboration, reflecting the practical priorities of communities struggling with resource constraints. Pottery production became more standardized and efficient, with potters developing new techniques that reduced fuel consumption while maintaining adequate quality for everyday use. Textile production adapted to utilize local fiber sources more effectively, reducing dependence on trade goods while maintaining adequate clothing production. The religious and ceremonial practices that sustained Bronze Age communities underwent significant modifications during the crisis period, adapting to changed social and economic circumstances while maintaining essential spiritual functions. The votive deposits that had characterized Golden Age religious practices continued but involved smaller quantities of less valuable objects. Communities could no longer afford to remove large quantities of bronze from circulation for ritual purposes, forcing adaptations in ceremonial practices that preserved spiritual significance while reducing economic costs. The rock art traditions that had flourished during the Golden Age continued during the crisis period, but showed changes in subject matter and artistic emphasis that reflected contemporary concerns. The ship motifs that had dominated earlier rock art became less common, while images of warriors and weapons increased in frequency. These changes suggest that maritime trade had become less central to community identity, while military concerns had gained prominence in cultural consciousness. The continuity of certain cultural traditions during the crisis period demonstrates the resilience of Nordic Bronze Age society and its ability to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining core identity elements. The spiral motifs that had characterized Golden Age art continued to appear on objects produced during the crisis, though in simplified forms that reflected reduced artistic resources. The persistence of these decorative traditions indicates that communities maintained cultural continuity despite dramatic changes in their material circumstances. The crisis and transformation that marked the final centuries of the Nordic Bronze Age occurred within a broader European context of cultural upheaval and technological innovation that fundamentally reshape the relationships between different regional societies. The disruptions affecting Scandinavian communities were part of continent-wide changes that included the collapse of Mediterranean palace civilizations, large-scale population movements, and the gradual transition from bronze to iron technology. Understanding the Nordic Bronze Age crisis requires examining the complex web of interactions between Scandinavian societies and their contemporaries throughout Europe, revealing how external influences both contributed to and helped resolve the challenges facing northern communities. The Urnfield culture, which dominated Central Europe from approximately 1300 to 800 BC, represented one of the most significant external influences on Nordic Bronze Age development during this critical period. This cultural complex, characterized by its distinctive cremation burial practices and standardized ceramic traditions, extended from the Rhine Valley in the west to the Carpathian Basin in the east, encompassing the primary source regions for copper and tin that had supplied Nordic bronze production for centuries. The emergence of Urnfield societies fundamentally altered the political and economic landscape of Central Europe, disrupting established trade relationships while creating new opportunities for cultural exchange. Archaeological evidence from Urnfield sites reveals sophisticated bronze-working traditions that paralleled and sometimes surpassed contemporary Nordic achievements. The bronze hoards discovered at sites like Pile in Sweden and Fardal in Denmark contain objects that show clear stylistic influences from Urnfield metalworking traditions, including distinctive sword types, ornamental fittings, and decorative motifs that originated in Central European workshops. Chemical analysis of these bronze objects confirms their foreign manufacture, indicating that direct trade relationships connected Nordic communities to Urnfield production centres, despite the geographic distances involved. The cremation burial practices that defined Urnfield societies began appearing in Scandinavian contexts during the later Bronze Age, representing a fundamental shift in religious beliefs and funerary traditions. The earliest cremation burials in Denmark and southern Sweden display ceramic vessel types and burial arrangements that closely mirror contemporary Urnfield practices, suggesting direct cultural transmission rather than independent parallel development. The adoption of cremation represented more than simple technological borrowing, requiring communities to abandon burial traditions that had defined elite identity for centuries, while embracing new concepts of death and spiritual transformation. The spread of Urnfield cultural elements into Scandinavia occurred through multiple mechanisms including trade relationships, population movements, and the transmission of technological knowledge. Archaeological evidence suggests that Urnfield craftsmen may have established workshops in Nordic territories, bringing specialised knowledge of new bronze-working techniques and decorative traditions. The consistency of certain object types across both Urnfield and Nordic contexts indicates systematic technology transfer that maintained quality standards while adapting production methods to local preferences and resource availability. The Atlantic Bronze Age complex, extending along the western coasts of Europe from Portugal to Scotland, provided another crucial source of external influence on Nordic societies during the later Bronze Age period. This maritime-oriented cultural network facilitated the movement of goods, technologies, and cultural practices across vast oceanic distances, connecting Scandinavian communities to developments in regions as distant as the Iberian Peninsula. The shared emphasis on maritime technology and coastal settlement patterns created natural connections between Nordic and Atlantic Bronze Age societies, despite their geographic separation. Bronze objects displaying characteristic Atlantic Bronze Age features have been discovered in Scandinavian contexts, including distinctive sword types, sheet bronze work, and ornamental traditions that originated in Western European workshops. The famous plougrescent sword type, characteristic of Breton bronze working traditions, appears in modified forms in Danish and Swedish archaeological contexts, indicating direct contact between Nordic and Atlantic communities. These weapons display construction techniques and decorative schemes that were subsequently adapted by Nordic craftsmen, creating hybrid forms that combined external influences with local traditions. The ship technology that enabled Atlantic Bronze Age maritime connections provided crucial innovations that enhanced Nordic seafaring capabilities during the crisis period. Archaeological evidence from sites like Hjortspring in Denmark reveals boat construction techniques that incorporated design elements from Atlantic traditions, including improved hull forms and rigging systems that increased vessel stability and cargo capacity. These technological improvements enabled Nordic communities to maintain maritime trade connections, despite the disruptions affecting overland routes through Central Europe. The amber trade that connected Scandinavia to Mediterranean markets operated through complex networks that included both Atlantic and Central European intermediaries. Archaeological evidence from sites throughout Western Europe reveals Baltic amber, in contexts that demonstrate the extensive reach of these trade relationships. The amber beads found in late Bronze Age contexts in Portugal and Spain show characteristic Baltic geological signatures, confirming that Scandinavian amber reached the Atlantic periphery through established exchange networks. The technological innovations that emerged from cultural exchange relationships included new metallurgical techniques that enhanced bronze production efficiency while reducing raw material requirements. The adoption of improved casting methods from urnfield traditions enabled Nordic craftsmen to produce hollow objects that achieved the same visual impact as solid castings while using significantly less bronze. These techniques became particularly important during the resource constraints of the crisis period, allowing communities to maintain bronze production despite reduced access to raw materials. The decorative traditions that developed through cultural exchange created distinctive hybrid styles that combined Nordic spiral motifs with geometric patterns derived from Central and Western European sources. The bronze razors produced during the later Bronze Age display complex decorative schemes that integrate multiple artistic traditions, creating objects that served as markers of cultural sophistication and international connections. These hybrid decorative styles subsequently influenced artistic development throughout Northern Europe, demonstrating the creative potential of cultural exchange relationships. The religious and ceremonial practices that emerged from cultural contact included new ritual traditions that adapted external influences to Nordic spiritual beliefs. The votive deposition practices that characterised later Bronze Age religious activities show influences from both Urnfield and Atlantic traditions, including new categories of ritual objects and modified deposition procedures. The bronze cauldrons found in Scandinavian bog deposits display construction techniques and decorative elements that originated in Central European ceremonial traditions, indicating the adoption of foreign ritual equipment for local religious purposes. The population movements that accompanied the late Bronze Age crisis created opportunities for direct cultural contact that accelerated the transmission of new technologies and social practices. Archaeological evidence suggests that groups from Central Europe established settlements in Scandinavian territories, bringing specialised knowledge of ironworking techniques and new agricultural practices. These immigrant communities appear to have integrated with existing populations while maintaining certain distinctive cultural practices that enriched local traditions. The linguistic evidence for cultural exchange during the Bronze Age includes loanwords and shared vocabulary elements that demonstrate contact between different language groups. Comparative analysis of Germanic, Celtic, and other Indo-European languages reveals common terms for bronze-working agricultural practices and social institutions that suggest extensive cultural communication during the Bronze Age period. These linguistic connections provide additional evidence for the systematic exchange of knowledge and cultural practices across European societies. The ironworking technology that began transforming European societies during the late Bronze Age reached Scandinavia through multiple channels of cultural transmission. The earliest iron objects found in Nordic contexts display construction techniques that originated in Central European traditions, indicating that ironworking knowledge arrived through established cultural exchange networks. The gradual adoption of iron technology represented more than simple technological substitution, requiring communities to develop new production systems while maintaining cultural continuity. The Hallstatt culture that emerged in Central Europe around 800 BC represented a new phase of cultural development that continued to influence Nordic societies into the early Iron Age. The distinctive material culture of Hallstatt communities, characterised by iron weapons, elaborate bronze vessels, and new burial practices, provided models that were subsequently adapted by Scandinavian societies. The longswords and iron spearheads that became characteristic of early Iron Age Scandinavia show clear influences from Hallstatt prototypes, demonstrating continued cultural exchange despite changing technological foundations. The trade networks that connected Nordic societies to external influences operated through sophisticated systems of reciprocal exchange that maintained relationships across vast distances despite periodic disruptions. The standardization of weight systems and measurement standards across different European regions indicates coordinated commercial practices that facilitated accurate valuation and exchange of goods. These standardized systems enabled Nordic communities to participate in international markets while maintaining local control over production and distribution. The cultural prestige associated with foreign goods and technologies created incentives for continued exchange relationships, even during periods of economic stress. Elite burials from the crisis period contain imported objects that represent substantial investments, indicating that access to foreign goods remained important for status display despite reduced overall wealth. The selective adoption of external influences demonstrates that Nordic communities maintained sophisticated criteria for evaluating foreign innovations while preserving essential elements of local cultural identity. The artistic traditions that developed through cultural exchange created new forms of expression that combined multiple stylistic influences while maintaining distinctive Nordic characteristics. The bronze vessels produced during the later Bronze Age display decorative schemes that integrate spiral motifs with geometric patterns derived from Central European sources, creating distinctive hybrid styles that influence subsequent artistic development. These artistic innovations demonstrate the creative potential of cultural contact, while illustrating how external influences were adapted to local aesthetic preferences. The agricultural innovations that reached Scandinavia through cultural exchange included new crop varieties and cultivation techniques that enhanced productivity during the challenging climatic conditions of the crisis period. The adoption of improved ploughing techniques from Central European sources enabled more efficient soil preparation while reducing labour requirements. New crop rotation systems that integrated legume cultivation with cereal production helped maintain soil fertility despite intensive cultivation practices. The defensive technologies that emerged from military contact with external societies included new fortification designs and weapon systems that enhanced community protection capabilities. The hill fort construction techniques that appeared in Scandinavia during the crisis period show influences from Central European defensive traditions, including improved gate systems and wall construction methods. These defensive innovations enabled Nordic communities to adapt to increased military pressures while maintaining territorial control. The religious syncretism that resulted from cultural contact created new spiritual traditions that combined Nordic beliefs with external influences. The ceremonial practices associated with water deposition show adaptations that incorporated ritual elements from both Urnfield and Atlantic traditions while maintaining essential Nordic spiritual concepts. These syncretic religious traditions provided cultural frameworks that helped communities adapt to changing circumstances while preserving spiritual continuity. The technological diffusion that characterized the Late Bronze Age created opportunities for innovation that enhanced Nordic capabilities across multiple domains. The improved bronzeworking techniques that reached Scandinavia through cultural exchange enabled more efficient production while maintaining quality standards. New agricultural tools and techniques enhanced productivity while reducing labour requirements, enabling communities to maintain subsistence security despite environmental challenges. The social institutions that emerged from cultural contact included new forms of political organisation and economic cooperation that enhanced community resilience during the crisis period. The evidence for coordinated defensive arrangements between different communities suggests the development of alliance systems that provided mutual protection against external threats. These cooperative relationships enabled Nordic societies to maintain territorial integrity while adapting to changing strategic environments. The material culture exchanges that connected Nordic societies to external influences included not only finished goods, but also raw materials and production technologies that enhanced local capabilities. The importation of new bronze alloy compositions enabled Nordic craftsmen to experiment with different metallurgical techniques while maintaining production quality. The adoption of new ceramic technologies improved pottery production while reducing fuel consumption, enabling more efficient resource utilization during periods of scarcity. The cultural resilience demonstrated by Nordic Bronze Age societies during the crisis period of 1100–900 BC provided the foundation for a gradual but fundamental transformation that would reshape Scandinavian civilization over the following centuries. Rather than experiencing catastrophic collapse, these communities adapted their sophisticated organizational systems and technological knowledge to accommodate new materials and changed circumstances, creating hybrid cultural forms that preserved essential Bronze Age traditions while embracing iron technology and its revolutionary implications for warfare, agriculture, and social organization. The earliest iron objects discovered in Scandinavian archaeological contexts date to approximately 1000 BC and reveal experimental approaches to working this new metal that drew heavily on established bronze working techniques. The iron knife blades found at sites like Voldtoft in Denmark display construction methods that mirror contemporary bronze implements, with iron cutting edges attached to bronze or bone handles using traditional riveting techniques. These early iron tools demonstrate that Nordic craftsmen initially treated iron as a substitute material for bronze rather than recognizing its fundamentally different properties and potential applications. The technological breakthrough that enabled effective iron production in Scandinavia came through the exploitation of bog iron deposits that were abundant throughout the region's wetland areas. Unlike the copper and tin required for bronze production, which had to be imported across vast distances, bog iron formed naturally through chemical processes in acidic wetland environments, creating renewable sources of raw material that communities could harvest locally. The extraction of bog iron required specialized knowledge of deposit identification and processing techniques. But once mastered, these skills provided communities with unprecedented metallurgical independence. The bloomery furnaces that enabled bog iron smelting represented significant technological innovations that adapted Mediterranean and Central European ironworking techniques to Scandinavian conditions and resources. Archaeological excavations at early iron production sites reveal furnace designs that incorporated local materials including granite stones, clay, and charcoal produced from specific tree species that provided optimal burning characteristics. The furnaces typically measured 120 centimeters in height, and required careful temperature control to achieve the 1200 to 1400 degrees Celsius necessary for iron reduction. The iron production process demanded substantially more fuel than bronze working, requiring communities to develop systematic forest management practices that ensured adequate charcoal supplies for sustained iron production. Archaeological evidence from ironworking sites reveals the consumption of enormous quantities of wood, with some production centres requiring entire forest stands to support seasonal smelting campaigns. This fuel demand created new economic relationships between iron producers and forest owners, establishing resource extraction systems that would characterise Scandinavian iron production for centuries. The quality of early Scandinavian iron varied considerably depending on ore sources and smelting techniques, with the best products approaching the performance characteristics of bronze tools, while inferior examples remained brittle and prone to corrosion. The development of carburization techniques that created steel through controlled carbon absorption represented a crucial innovation that enabled iron tools to surpass bronze implements in hardness and durability. Archaeological analysis reveals that Nordic smiths had mastered basic steel production by 800 BC, creating cutting edges that maintained sharpness far longer than bronze equivalents. The agricultural revolution enabled by iron technology transformed Scandinavian farming practices through the introduction of iron ploughshares, axes, and other implements that dramatically increased cultivation efficiency. Iron ploughshares could penetrate heavy clay soils that had been difficult to work with bronze tools, enabling communities to bring new agricultural areas into production while improving yields from existing fields. The iron axes that replaced bronze implements for forest clearance could fell trees more efficiently while requiring less maintenance, accelerating the expansion of agricultural territories. The social implications of iron technology adoption extended far beyond simple tool replacement to encompass fundamental changes in wealth distribution and political organisation. The local availability of iron ore democratized access to metal tools, breaking the monopoly over metal production that had sustained Bronze Age elite power structures. Communities that had been dependent on elite-controlled bronze distribution networks could now produce their own iron implements, reducing the economic leverage that had enabled warrior chiefs to maintain territorial control. The weapon systems that emerged from iron technology adoption created new military capabilities while altering the social significance of martial equipment. Iron swords could be produced in much larger quantities than bronze weapons, enabling the armament of larger military forces while reducing the prestige value of individual weapons. The long iron swords that became characteristic of the pre-Roman Iron Age measured 80 centimetres in length and featured improved metallurgical construction that created superior cutting and thrusting capabilities compared to bronze predecessors. The spear technology that dominated early Iron Age warfare reflected both continuity with Bronze Age traditions and adaptation to new metallurgical possibilities. Iron spearheads could be forged with longer, narrower points that provided superior penetration while maintaining adequate strength for repeated use. The socketed construction typical of Bronze Age spears continued into the Iron Age, but ironsmiths developed improved techniques for creating secure attachments between metal points and wooden shafts. The defensive equipment that accompanied iron weapon development included iron shield bosses and armour elements that provided enhanced protection while remaining economically feasible for larger numbers of warriors. The iron shield bosses found in early Iron Age contexts display sophisticated forging techniques that created strong, lightweight protective elements capable of deflecting iron weapon strikes. The gradual replacement of bronze defensive equipment with iron alternatives enabled communities to equip larger military forces while maintaining adequate protection standards. The settlement patterns that emerged during the Iron Age transition reflected both defensive considerations and new economic opportunities created by iron production. Many communities relocated their primary settlements to positions that provided better access to bog iron deposits, while maintaining defensive capabilities and agricultural productivity. The hill forts that had characterised the late Bronze Age crisis period continued to serve defensive functions, but were often supplemented by specialised ironworking settlements that concentrated production activities near raw material sources. The house construction techniques that developed during the Iron Age transition incorporated iron tools while maintaining architectural traditions established during the Bronze Age. The longhouses that remained the standard domestic architecture featured improved construction techniques enabled by iron woodworking tools, including more precise joinery and enhanced structural capabilities. Archaeological evidence reveals that Iron Age longhouses were often larger and more substantially built than their Bronze Age predecessors, reflecting both improved construction technology and changing family organisation patterns. The agricultural intensification enabled by iron tools supported population growth that created pressures for territorial expansion and the establishment of new settlements in previously marginal areas. The iron axes and clearing tools that facilitated forest removal enabled rapid expansion of agricultural territories, while iron ploughshares allowed cultivation of heavy soils that had been impractical to work with bronze implements. Archaeological surveys reveal the establishment of numerous new settlements during the early Iron Age, particularly in upland areas and previously forested regions. The craft production systems that emerged during the Iron Age transition combined traditional Bronze Age specializations with new ironworking capabilities, creating diversified manufacturing complexes that served both local and regional markets. Pottery production continued to utilize established techniques while incorporating new decorative traditions that reflected changing cultural preferences. Textile production expanded through the use of improved iron tools for fibre processing and loom construction, enabling higher quality fabric production while reducing labour requirements. The religious practices that survived the Bronze Age to Iron Age transition demonstrate remarkable continuity despite fundamental changes in material culture and social organisation. The votive deposition traditions that had characterised Bronze Age religious activities continued into the Iron Age, but adapted to utilise iron objects alongside traditional bronze offerings. The bog deposits from early Iron Age contexts contain both bronze and iron objects, indicating that communities maintained established ritual practices while incorporating new material categories into ceremonial activities. The rock art traditions that had flourished during the Bronze Age continued into the early Iron Age, but showed significant changes in subject matter and artistic emphasis that reflected contemporary concerns. The ship motifs that had dominated Bronze Age rock art became less common, while warrior imagery increased in frequency and complexity. The weapons depicted in Iron Age rock art include characteristic longswords and iron-tipped spears that accurately represent contemporary military equipment, demonstrating the continued importance of artistic traditions for documenting cultural developments. The astronomical knowledge that had characterized Bronze Age religious and ceremonial systems continued to influence Iron Age cultural practices, though often in modified forms that reflected changing social priorities. The stone ship settings and other ceremonial monuments constructed during the early Iron Age maintained traditional astronomical alignments while incorporating new architectural elements that reflected ironworking capabilities. The continuity of astronomical observation traditions indicates that communities preserve sophisticated intellectual achievements despite dramatic changes in their material circumstances. The burial practices that defined early Iron Age societies represented fundamental departures from Bronze Age traditions, while maintaining certain essential ceremonial elements. The cremation burials that had begun appearing during the late Bronze Age became the dominant funerary practice throughout Scandinavia, creating urn-filled cemeteries that emphasized community membership over individual status distinctions. The grave goods accompanying Iron Age cremations typically included iron tools and weapons, alongside traditional bronze ornaments, demonstrating the integration of new and old material culture categories. The ceramic traditions that developed during the Iron Age transition created distinctive vessel forms that served both practical and ceremonial functions while maintaining decorative connections to Bronze Age artistic traditions. The urns used for cremation burials display sophisticated construction techniques and decorative schemes that adapted traditional spiral motifs to new vessel forms. The standardization of ceramic types across wide geographic areas indicates continued cultural unity despite the political fragmentation that characterized the transition period. The trade networks that sustained Iron Age communities operated through different organizational principles than their Bronze Age predecessors, emphasizing regional exchange relationships over long-distance connections to distant resource sources. The local availability of iron ore reduced dependence on international trade for basic tool production, though specialized goods including high-quality bronze objects, amber products and luxury items continued to move through established exchange networks. Archaeological evidence reveals that Iron Age trade operated at multiple scales, from local resource sharing to international luxury exchange. The amber working traditions that had been central to Nordic Bronze Age prosperity continued to provide economic foundations for Iron Age communities, though operating through modified production and distribution systems. The techniques for amber processing and jewellery production that had developed during the Bronze Age continued to evolve during the Iron Age, creating new product categories that serve both local and export markets. The amber beads and ornaments found in Iron Age contexts display sophisticated manufacturing techniques that maintained quality standards while adapting to changing aesthetic preferences. The technological innovations that characterize the Iron Age transition extended beyond metallurgy to encompass improvements in agriculture, transportation, and craft production that enhanced community capabilities across multiple domains. The development of improved plough designs enabled more efficient soil cultivation while reducing animal draft requirements. New boat construction techniques that incorporated iron fastenings created more durable vessels capable of handling heavier cargoes and rougher sea conditions. The political organisation that emerged during the Iron Age transition reflected both continuity with Bronze Age leadership traditions and adaptation to new economic and military realities created by iron technology. The warrior chiefs who had dominated Bronze Age society continued to play important leadership roles, but their authority increasingly depended on military effectiveness, rather than control over metal production and trade networks. The democratization of weapon production enabled by iron technology created more egalitarian military structures while maintaining the importance of skilled leadership and tactical coordination. The territorial boundaries that had been established during the Bronze Age generally persisted into the Iron Age, though often under different political arrangements that reflected changing power relationships. The hill forts and defensive positions that had been constructed during the late Bronze Age crisis continued to serve strategic functions while adapting to new military technologies and tactical requirements. Archaeological evidence suggests that territorial control became more fluid during the Iron Age transition, with boundaries shifting in response to demographic changes and military pressures. The cultural identity that sustained Nordic societies through the Bronze Age to Iron Age transition demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability, while preserving essential traditions that maintained community cohesion. The artistic motifs that had characterised Bronze Age material culture continued to appear on Iron Age objects, though often in modified forms that reflected new aesthetic preferences and production capabilities. The spiral decorations that had unified Bronze Age visual culture appeared on Iron Age pottery, metalwork and other objects, creating visual continuity across technological transitions. The linguistic developments that accompanied the Iron Age transition included the emergence of distinctive Germanic dialects that would eventually evolve into the historical Scandinavian languages. The vocabulary associated with ironworking and new agricultural techniques expanded rapidly during this period, creating specialised terminology that reflected technological innovations. Comparative linguistic analysis suggests that many fundamental Germanic cultural concepts developed during the Iron Age transition, establishing intellectual frameworks that would influence Scandinavian societies for millennia. The environmental adaptations that enabled successful Iron Age settlement included sophisticated forest management practices that balanced iron production fuel requirements with agricultural expansion needs and long-term sustainability concerns. Communities developed systematic approaches to woodland harvesting that maintained adequate timber supplies for construction, fuel, and tool production while preventing deforestation that would have threatened long-term resource availability. The coppicing and selective harvesting techniques that emerged during this period created sustainable forest management systems that continued to operate throughout the Iron Age. The population dynamics that characterised the Iron Age transition included both demographic growth enabled by agricultural improvements and population movements that redistributed communities across the Scandinavian landscape. Archaeological evidence suggests that Iron Age populations were significantly larger than their Bronze Age predecessors, reflecting both natural increase and immigration from other regions. The establishment of new settlements in previously marginal areas indicates that communities had developed sufficient confidence in their technological and organisational capabilities to undertake substantial colonisation projects. The social stratification that emerged during the Iron Age transition maintained certain hierarchical elements from Bronze Age society, while adapting to new economic realities created by iron technology. Wealth differences continued to exist but were expressed through different material markers than had characterised Bronze Age elite display. The iron weapons and tools that became standard equipment for most community members reduced the prestige value of simple metal ownership while creating new categories of luxury goods that served elite status display functions. The Germanic tribal confederations that would dominate later Scandinavian history began to emerge during the Iron Age transition, building on political and territorial foundations established during the Bronze Age. The Cimbri, Teutones and other tribal groups that appear in historical sources during the 2nd and 1st centuries BC represented the culmination of political developments that began during the Bronze Age to Iron Age transition. These confederations combined traditional Scandinavian organisational principles with new military capabilities enabled by iron technology, creating political structures that could coordinate activities across substantial territories. The archaeological methodology that has revealed the complexities of the Nordic Bronze Age to Iron Age transition reflects over 2 centuries of scholarly investigation that began with early antiquarian interests and evolved into sophisticated scientific approaches utilising advanced analytical techniques. The pioneering work of scholars like Oscar Montelius, who established the fundamental chronological framework still used for Bronze Age studies, provided essential foundations for understanding cultural development and change processes. Modern archaeological techniques including radiocarbon dating, chemical analysis, and environmental reconstruction have refined our understanding of transition processes while revealing new aspects of ancient life that were previously inaccessible. The lasting influence of Bronze Age cultural patterns on later Scandinavian societies and Germanic tribes extended far beyond simple technological traditions to encompass fundamental aspects of social organisation, religious belief, and cultural identity that persisted throughout the Iron Age and into historical periods. The warrior ethos that had characterised Bronze Age elite culture continued to influence Germanic military traditions, while the astronomical knowledge and ceremonial practices that had defined Bronze Age religious systems provided foundations for later Scandinavian spiritual traditions. The artistic motifs and decorative schemes that had unified Bronze Age visual culture continued to appear in modified forms throughout the Iron Age, creating cultural continuity that connected prehistoric and historical Scandinavian societies across millennia of change and development. The Nordic Bronze Age thus represents not merely a prehistoric technological phase, but a foundational period that established cultural patterns, social institutions, and intellectual traditions that would continue to influence Northern European civilization for thousands of years. The sophisticated societies that flourished in Scandinavia between 1700 and 500 BC created lasting legacies in technology, art, religion, and social organisation that provided essential foundations for the Germanic tribes and early Scandinavian kingdoms that would follow. Their achievements in metallurgy, maritime technology, astronomical observation, and cultural integration across vast territories demonstrate capabilities that rival those of any contemporary civilization, while their successful adaptation to changing circumstances during the Iron Age transition reveals sophisticated mechanisms for cultural survival and transformation that enabled continuity across one of prehistory's most significant technological revolutions.